This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome everyone to today's Environment Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us as we discuss the important topic of swimmable rivers. This is the last meeting in a three-part investigation exploring the Mayor's manifesto commitment to develop a bold plan for swimmable rivers within the next 10 years. We'll also explore priorities for improving London's rivers and have the opportunity to ask questions to the Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy, as well as a representative from Transport for London regarding current plans. Before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping items to address. I'd like to remind everyone to please switch their phones to silent mode. Please keep your phones away from the microphones, and if you do adjust the microphone, please make sure you lift it from the base. Members of the public are encouraged to follow at London Assembly on X or Blue Sky, and to use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Now I have a few items of business to cover. Can I now ask our committee officer, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received.
Thanks, Sal. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence sent? Thank you very much. Now, moving on to today's main item of business, swimmable rivers. Today's discussion will be divided into two panels. I'd like to welcome our first panel now. We're joined by James Wallace, who is Chief Executive of River Action, Alex Nixon, who is Director for Environmental Compliance and Partnerships at Thames Water, Rob Gray, Chair and Director of the Crane Valley CIC, Friends of the River Crane, FORCE is the acronym, and Ross Daniels, Director of London and South East Region Canal and River Trust. Welcome to you all. James, if I can begin with you. So the Mayor's made this commitment for swimmable rivers in the next 10 years. Can I ask what engagement have you had with the Mayor's office on this, and what is your reaction to the commitment? Sorry, can I get you to put your microphone on? Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming me and River Action to this. We were delighted to hear that the Mayor has developed his 10-year plan. So as I understand it, by 2034 to have swimmable rivers. And if it's anything like his energies put into the third runway at Heathrow and the ULEZ scheme for air, we hope that he will follow through with his commitments to water pollution too. If we look at the situation we face now, though, the river is in a pretty dire place. And we're looking at serious risks to human health and to wildlife and to our water security. And as I gave to the hearing a year and a half ago, and thanks for inviting me back, Leonie and Zach, things have not improved. So I'm looking forward to be able to contribute today and make the case for, excuse me for pointing this out, but for putting Thames Water into special administration, because we believe that's the only way to solve this problem.
Thank you very much, James. Alex, if I can come to you on the Mayor's commitment and your engagement with it.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you for the opportunity to be here to present our information. So we share the Mayor's ambition for London rivers to be clean, healthy, vibrant for nature, and where appropriate, swimmable. We're committed to playing our part to help achieve this, alongside other actors who have influence on how the river's health and accessibility is managed for ensuring safe recreation. The focus of our work will be to ensure that we have high standards of sewage treatment at our works, that we reduce the number and impact of combined sewer overflows from our network and our treatment works where they occur, and reducing the impact of pollution incidents. So we are very much supportive of this, though we would note there are a wide range of players that need to play a role here, and we see ourselves as leading partners in that, and look forward to further discussions.
Thanks. I have lots of questions, but we'll get to them in a moment. Rob, if I can just ask you this opening question, what engagement you've had with the Mayor and the GLA team?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm wearing two hats, as you pointed out earlier. I helped set up a charity in 2003 called FORCE, which is Friends of the River Crane Environment, the River Crane being a river in West London covering 5 boroughs in West London. And with that hat on, we submitted a response to the Swimmable Rivers consultation, very broadly welcoming it and actually seeing swimmability as a proxy for healthiness. Because I think swimmability is a function of a very small amount of London's rivers, actually, but healthiness is important to all of them. And then my other hat actually is chair of the Crane Valley Community Interest Company. That's a social enterprise which hosts the Crane Valley Partnership, which is a partnership of all the boroughs, Thames Water, the Environment Agency, Heathrow, various other partners, lots of community partners. And with that hat on, we've really found discovering how we can improve London's rivers, and it's a really useful pilot for that, which I'll come on to later. Thank you.
Thanks. And just as a quick follow-up for now, you talk in your submission about paddability rather than swimmability, and you alluded to it then. How helpful is the language of swimmable rivers overall?
I think it's interesting. I think it captures the public imagination, which I think is very helpful. But I think when you dig down into it, the Crane really isn't a swimmable river for reasons of depth and access and other things. Even if the water quality were perfect, there's only very few places you could swim in it. So I think paddleability is something which is more functional in terms of there are large parts of the river that kids do paddle in from time to time and would paddle in if there were better access and the water quality were a little bit better. But paddleability might be more of a mouthful.
It doesn't trip in the same way, but that's really helpful. Ros, welcome. So what engagement have the CRT had with the Mayor and GLA, and what's your response to this commitment?
As ever, thank you for the invitation, and the Canal River Trust sort of welcomes again the opportunity to be here today and welcomes anything that promotes...
sorry, could you put your microphone on? I can't hear you.
It is on.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah, lovely. Yeah, welcomes the opportunity to be here, and anything that promotes us helping us as a national charity to look over 100 kilometres of canals and rivers across London and makes them accessible to more of Londoners. 1.9 million people live within 15 minutes of this free accessible waterways, and all those wonderful health benefits that come along with being outdoors and by blue and green space. So we welcome anything that brings highlights, but obviously sort of remain with some concerns about water safety and how we keep people safe if swimmability is the objective.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to water safety later on. Obviously, you're the Canal and River Trust. Can I ask what are the main differences between keeping the water quality good in a canal and a river? What are some of the challenges?
Obviously, canals are man-made, and across London we also have over 7,000 boaters who live on as homes or as leisure users of those. So multiple users of man-made structures as well, and not the same river flows, obviously. But again, some of the main concerns about water quality and environmental quality still are concerned with canals as much as rivers.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. My initial question is for River Action and Force, if I can, and that's just what are your biggest priorities for improving the water quality in our rivers over the next 10 years? Perhaps, James, if I start with you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Well, let's start at where we are now. I have some vials, by the way, to give each of you. These are bits of water from 102 waterways across the country. They were brought together on the March for Clean Water that River Action hosted in November. And I bring them because I'd like to remind us all why we're really here, and it's for the water, the rivers, and the community that are sustained by them. We've done testing just outside here in the past few days, and we've found up to 15,000 CFUs. There's a colony forming units. That is, bearing in mind, 900 is the limit for safe bathing. So if we're going to have swimmable rivers, we have some serious action to do. Over the course of a test we did, we had an average of 8,000 CFUs. Bearing in mind the Tide Bay Tunnel is only been partially opened, we would expect it to improve a bit, but that data shows me that is not going to solve the problem. So we also have not only spills to bear in mind, which come through often increased groundwater or heavy rainfall, but also for other reasons, and I would put that down to lack of investment by the water company, Thames Water. We also have permits that are not up to scratch. So in this country, most of the country only requires permitting for the final treated effluent to come out at, it's called secondary level treatment. What that means is that the E. coli levels and other nasties, microplastics, bacteria, viruses and so on still come out in very high numbers up and down the Thames, not only in the city and the Greater London, but also upstream. So we have a chemical cocktail. Now, I do agree that the sources of those pollution sources are multiple. That is true. So road runoff is a big issue. I also agree that Thames Water is not responsible for whether we have lots of concrete above the ground and rainwater coming off roofs and gutters. So there's a systemic issue. However, what we've also seen since privatisation, the company has built up and accrued a huge amount of debt. Depending on which paper you read and which source, 19 billion is the current estimate by campaign groups We Own It and Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. Right now, there is a hearing for a further 3 billion of debt. We're looking at 9.75% interest. This is basic economics. I'm a bill payer for Thames Water, and 33% roughly of my bill services junk debt. The current plan from the government and from Thames Water is to make it worse, to give more debt to bail out current investors, and for me and all of us here who are bill payers to do that. So the root cause needs to be dealt with. I very much welcome the Mayor's endeavour for swimmable rivers, and I'm very pleased that he's invited River Action and other groups to join the round table coming, and I'm very glad to be sitting next to Alex here too. But I have to point out that there's also a lot of influence from Thames Water. I'm not going to get personal about individuals in the room, but as far as the organisations they represent, one way or another, Thames Water funds all the work represented by the three people on this panel, whether it's the Canal and Rivers Trust or Crane and Force. So that is not to say they shouldn't do it. I think there's a lot of work that's remedial and is very helpful. But when it comes to solving the problem, we are not going to have swimmable rivers by 2034 unless Thames Water is sorted out. So how do we do that? Very briefly. Most of this is about debt and its cost. If we were to have a special administration regime, which we believe the government should have done in the past and to definitely do now, it's to rescue the company. So I've got nothing against Alex or the company. I'm very grateful for the services that I receive. However, we believe that a new financing of the organisation and a better governance structure, just as we see in Europe, for example, in countries like Germany, Switzerland, France, Denmark, where they have blended finance, a mixture of private, public and not-for-profit, and a governance structure that includes proper municipal oversight. So I would argue that the Mayor of London should have a role as the boss, as it were, and the GLA for running the city. Why is there such a distance between Thames Water's operation and the Mayor's power? He has, or she in the future, has no power over this, which is why we're talking about beavers and wetlands and suds and those sorts of things, not going to the root cause. So we would secondly, in addition to asking the Mayor to pressure the government to put Thames Water into special administration, we would also welcome him to make a point to Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer to say, let's have the resources back for the Environment Agency. Thames Water, being a private entity, will pollute as long as they can get away with it. In 2017, there was a fish kill of about 1,500, 2,000 fish. It took 6 years to prosecute. It only cost a fine of 3.3 billion. The debt I just mentioned, they are slightly out of kilter, aren't they? So we need a proper governance structure and regulation as well. Thank you for allowing me to start off.
Okay, thank you. And we've heard those arguments before as well. Yeah. Rob, do you want to say, what are your priorities?
Well, my priorities are improving the river, but also improving the green spaces around the river. And I think one of the things which is really interesting and important, and possibly sometimes overlooked about rivers in London, is that river corridors are often the way that green spaces are linked in London. If you were to look at a satellite image of London, you would see these green and blue corridors that run through it. Now, the GLA have done a lot of interesting work around that, around the All London Green Grid and around green and blue open space strategies, which I really welcome. I think this is an opportunity to re-engage with that work and to think at a catchment scale about how rivers function. And actually, we've got a really good network across Greater London of catchment partnerships. They were set up by DEFRA in about 2015, I think. Ours, actually, the Crane Valley Partnership, was set up a lot earlier than that in 2005. And the great thing about catchment partnerships is that they bring together all the interested parties, because the one thing about rivers and open spaces in Greater London is that they are very complicated, very contested spaces, where people are either fighting for it or they're fighting to divest liability from it. And both those pressures you will see a lot in our open spaces and in the rivers. The thing about partnership working, and it's the, I mean, I've worked in this sector for a long time. I've been doing this stuff for about 30 odd years and been doing urban rivers for 20 years. And this partnership-based working, which is properly funded, is the one thing that I've seen actually making significant beneficial change at scale. So it basically means that people share responsibility and they share ownership and they share projects and work together with the communities to make things better. And I don't share James's view as to the condition of our rivers, actually. I think our rivers are getting better. I think one of the reasons why the public is engaged with rivers and they weren't engaged with rivers 10 and 15 or 20 years ago is because the rivers are getting better. At the moment, we've got fish in our rivers, so we can have fish kills. 20 years ago, you couldn't have had a fish kill because there weren't any fish in some of these rivers. So things are getting better. The public are engaged, which is also wonderful. The public care. But I think it's our role to kind of think about how we can best use that engagement to actually improve things. And I think the GLA have got a significant role in this. And I think starting probably with the catchment hosts and the catchment partnerships and the existing organisations which work together as something called Rivers Partnerships in London, there's existing network there that the GLA are already talking to but could engage with further.
Lovely. And I think I'm right in saying that you are the UK's first smarter water catchment programme.
We believe we're the UK's first urban smarter water catchment. I mean, the Even Load was a rural catchment which started 5 years before us, and then the Chess and the Crane were kicked off in 2020. The Chess is a mix of rural and urban and a chalk catchment. We're almost entirely urban and suburban, which brings its own challenges and its own potential as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then just coming back to James, if I can, you mentioned about the Environment Agency and the lack of funding it has to carry out its statutory work. We actually talked to the Environment Agency. They were here at one of our earlier hearings, and they told us they're planning to increase its inspection and compliance activity. And they said they have at the moment, I believe, 4,000 compliance activities at the moment, and they're planning to increase that to 11,500 for the next 3 years. And they are going to be employing 42 new staff in London to work on that. Do you think that's enough?
More monitoring would be a very good idea. And in fairness to Thames Water, they were the first to go online and start disclosing data. And through the help of organisations like sewagemap.co.uk, there's now historic data as well, so one can look back. However, there's a long way to go. A lot of discharge points aren't even known by Thames Water. And it's not just particular to them, it's across the whole country. There's a lot of mapping still to be done. So increased resourcing and testing is very important. However, data is part of the story. We then need to consider what do we do with that data. And as the panel here will be very well aware, there's very little in the way of prosecutions. The fish kill that I mentioned took 6 years to come to court. I've had conversations with the leaders of the EA very recently when they acknowledged it's at least 4 years to wait for court time. So there's a systemic issue here as well. And then the punitive measures. If you're 19 billion in debt, and you've issued 196 million in dividends in the last financial year, then a 3.3 million fine is not even going to be noticed on the bottom line. So we need to see serious punitive measures drawn against polluters. As far as we're concerned as a campaign group, the law is not an option. It has to be enforced. And at the moment, the government, both the previous one and the current one, are not doing enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to endorse what you were saying, James, really around special measures, and also to plug a report from Commonwealth that looks at how this might be done. I had this conversation with the Mayor at Mayor's Question Time before the government changed, and he said he felt that Thames Water were likely to get nationalised anyway, and it shouldn't cost a penny of taxpayers' money. I asked him if he was asking for expropriation, which is what I'd support, and he wouldn't answer that question. So it's really good to hear that you're adding that pressure and support to actually saying that he has a role to play in pushing the government here. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just pick up on the previous point and direct this one to Alex, which is, in your opinion, does the Water Special Measures Bill go far enough?
Thank you. I think it's a really good start. I think it's hugely ambitious. It's helpful in a number of areas. But I would say that it's got to come back to, is it bringing and enabling all the partners to work coherently? Because, the Environment Agency study into the causes of poor river quality, the so-called RNAGs, established that only 32% of issues are related to water companies, and the large proportion of others relate to road runoff and agriculture. Now, that's probably not a big issue, agriculture for London itself, but probably the road runoff is a larger issue. And unless it brings all those partners and their ability to invest in a cumulatively additive way, then I don't think we're going to break this problem. And that's why I think this is, we're really keen to lean into this problem, and we see the proposed round table to bring the players together as a good starting point. But simply banging the water companies over the head is not going to give us the vision that we all want to achieve.
Thank you for that. So sticking with, I'm afraid all my questions are to you, Alex. How has Ofwat's final determination on pricing for 2025 to 2030, which was published in December, affected your future investment decisions in addressing water waste pollution into London's rivers?
So we are currently reviewing Ofwat's final determination. It was a really tough settlement. We asked for £23.7 billion to invest over the next 5 years. Ofwat came back with 19.9 billion, so 4 billion short of what we asked for, and some very, very stretching targets, combined with some very, very hard-hitting penalties for non-delivery of those targets. So currently our exec and board are considering that, about whether we can accept it or whether we will go to the Competition and Markets Authority. We have real questions about the deliverability of the entire ambition. We don't think there's enough capacity in the UK supply chains to support all of the water companies in the UK delivering everything that Ofwat would wish. There simply isn't enough engineers, concrete, widgets, whatever it might need to be, sewer depth monitors, for example, to be able to deliver on that ambition. And yet water companies have been asked to deliver to that and face penalties for non-delivery. So we've proposed a range of what are called gated processes, where we say we will do the minimum, and if there's more we can do, then we will try and do it, but it cannot be subject to us. We cannot be penalised for non-delivery of something we have no control over at this point. So it's a finely cut, finely balanced position at the moment, and as I say, our executive board are looking at that and will make a decision by the 18th of February.
Thank you. And in December, the London Waterkeeper told the committee that Thames Water is currently relying too much on large infrastructure solutions rather than sustainable urban drainage schemes. Do you feel you have this balance correct?
I think it has to be a mix of grey and green solutions. You know, we cannot build and dig our way out of this problem. Certainly, we have a massive responsibility to improve our network and to improve our sewage treatment works and ensure that they are meeting the permit requirements and resilient to the vagaries of our weather. But at the same time, we cannot build enough concrete pipes, etc., to solve the problem. We published something called the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan that looked at what is the impact of climate change and population growth over the longer term on wastewater services. And it identified that in London, we needed to work with partners to disconnect about 7,000 hectares of currently impermeable green space to green spaces. So that's about 50 Hyde Parks or 10,500 football pitches. Plus we needed to install about 5 million cubic metres of tactical storage. Plus we needed to upsize about 1,000 kilometres of sewer. That is over the 25-year period. Now, some of those things are well within our gift to deliver and are part of our AMP8 2025 to 2030 plan. Some of them we need partnership working to deliver. So we are looking to boroughs and other partners about how we can make those things happen cost effectively. So just to reiterate, it's a combination of grey and green solutions, and we think SUDS particularly can help take the strain off our drains and enable them to operate as they were originally designed.
Thank you. And final question from me then is that when can we expect your storm overflows discharge reduction plan, and what stakeholders have you engaged with locally to get the balance right between infrastructure and sustainable urban drainage system?
It's a very interesting question, that. So the storm overflow reduction plan is a piece of policy set out by government. It sets stringent targets on reducing the number of combined sewer overflows, and it seeks to prioritise those in areas where you have the greatest sensitivity. So in our patch, that is a lot of chalk streams in the Thames Valley area. It also put the emphasis on water companies fixing them by looking at our solutions on our network and our sites. So it makes delivery with other partners more complex because it seeks you to look at a grey infrastructure solution ahead of a green infrastructure solution. Part of this might become because of the necessity of hitting certain timelines. Partnership projects are, by their very nature, more uncertain and difficult to fit within set timelines, but we are very keen to look at green solutions wherever possible and are working through our river partnerships to look at such opportunities. But to re-emphasise, the storm overflow reduction plan emphasises reducing spills to rivers that are most sensitive. So that means we are forced to focus on rivers outside of London first.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're here, Alex, and you're being come to be scrutinised, and I accept what you say about people, can't just bang water companies. But listening to what James says and speaking to the public, people are pretty furious. I think they see billions of pounds going to shareholders and not being spent in investment in kind of old infrastructure. And then we hear talks of misconnections and surface runoff, and it sometimes feels like it's everyone else's problem. What is Thames Water's line in how you're justifying this bill increase for customers at the same time as water quality does not seem to be improving to the average member of the public?
Thank you. So two things. Firstly, we've not paid an external dividend to shareholders since 2017, and we've committed not to pay one until 2030. So the dividends you're reading in the press are about payments for debt and to pensions. So we are not been paying dividends to our shareholders. Okay. On the second bit, the increase in bills is due to meet a number of rising challenges. The first is a massive increase in permit requirements. So tighter levels on phosphorus, tighter levels on sewer overflows, etc., meeting also the requirements of growth and climate change. So this isn't that we're being paid for the same, we are being paid to do much, much more. And that requires greater investment, and that will require bills to go up. We're very keen to manage the impact. We are acutely conscious of the impact on customers of those bills, and therefore we've sought to manage that. But we need investment if we want to have the cleaner rivers, the secure water supply, etc., that the public want and rightfully expect.
I think the argument back would be that when the public body was privatised, there was zero debt, and so that debt has been created by privatisation. But I won't take us down that rabbit hole because it's not really what we're here to talk about today. On SUDS, the scale of ambition that the Mayor is being put forward feels, well, I guess, what do you feel about that in terms of what is Thames Water's role in the hectares that the Mayor is saying needs to happen?
I would say there's three key things we need to be doing. The first thing is working collectively with strategic partners to set that vision and look at how to create a plan that can deliver it. The second bit is how do we play our role in incentivising its delivery and enabling its delivery. And the third bit is the perennial problem about who looks after them. So you'll recall in London we had significant flooding in July 2021. Various partners, yourselves included, looked at what was the cause of those floods, how could they be managed. That led to various roundtables and the formation of the London Surface Water Strategic Group. That partnership is now working to produce a surface water strategy, and that strategy is aiming to seek how do we deliver that kind of scale of SUDS, landscape scale change in London. And the work is currently looking at dividing London into a number of surface water catchments, and for each of those catchments looking at where are the best places to locate SUDS to alleviate flood risk, but also there will be benefits to sewer overflows. We have a key role in financially incentivising partners to work with us to deliver SUDS, but we don't think we're the only partner there. We think London local authorities as lead local flood authorities have responsibility as well, as do other major owners of impermeable surfaces. One very nice project that we're working with the GLA on is actually looking at how we can deliver SUDS through street works. So some work by the GLA identified that about 165,000 big holes are dug in London every year for utilities. And the question was, well, how can we fill those holes with something more productive potentially than road or pavement from a flood risk perspective? So we're working with the GLA and the Environment Agency and partners to look at how we could potentially incentivise utility companies when undertaking street works to deliver SUDS in areas where we know they will have a benefit to downstream flood risk, because we think that could be one of the key levers in massively changing the delivery of SUDS.
Thanks. And finally, do you think local authorities and TfL are doing enough? Like, are they doing it at the pace and scale that needs to happen?
Well, I think we're making a really good start. I think there is certainly a lot more that could be done. Personally, I think every time there is an opportunity to change a land cover surface, we should be looking at how we can make that more permeable or serve multiple functions. So part of what the London Surface Water Strategy is going to articulate is what is the opportunity in retrofitting London to make it more greener, more sustainably drained, and more a better place to live.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Alex, if I could just take you up on the point about overflowing of combined sewage and what have you. In my ward, I have an issue whereby there's persistent overflowing of raw sewage into a residential street. I have twice written to your Chief Executive, and on both occasions I've been fobbed off with absolute puerile emails from your customer relations team. Who should I write to? Should I write to you about this, or are you just going to continue to fob off elected members with puerile responses?
I'd be very pleased to receive an email from you and follow that.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. If I can turn to you just on this issue of misconnections, what's the experience in the Crane Valley of misconnections, and what do you think needs to happen in terms of enforcement?
Yeah, thank you. In 2014, we set up something called Citizen Crane, where we started to monitor the whole river system using volunteers, and worked with Thames Water and the Environment Agency to look at that data and what it was telling us. And we're continuing to do that work. And through that work, we worked very closely with the Thames Water SWAP team, Surface Water Outfall Programme team, and that's a team that goes out and tries to find misconnections. And then in 2016, we set up the UK's first outfall safari, where we went out, all our volunteers went out and mapped all the outfalls for the very first time, and found about 270 of them, which was more than anybody expected. These are surface water drains, which should actually just be carrying clean water. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are polluted with one thing or another, and a lot of that pollution is caused by misconnections. So that allowed us to, again, work with the Thames Water SWAP team and the Environment Agency to target their approach to trying to find these misconnections. And they found hundreds of them. So the thinking is that between 1% and 3% of London's properties are misconnected. And what that means is that some or all of the discharge that should be going to the sewer and should be going to the sewage works is actually going to the river. We know that hundreds of misconnections have been removed, but we also know, because we've now done 3 of these outfall safaris, the last one last summer, is that the outfalls are not getting noticeably better. They're getting a little bit better, but not a lot. So what we suspect is that new misconnections are being added all the time, and this is a problem. What we also know is that although when the Thames Water operatives tell the householder that they've got a misconnection, around 85% of the time the householder fixes it. If the householder doesn't fix it, Thames Water then pass that address and information to the local authority, who have the powers to, but don't have formal responsibility to do something about it usually through their EHO. So more and more of these misconnected properties are stacking up with local authorities who either don't have the resources or don't have the desire to actually do anything about it. So this is a big problem. So misconnections are probably the worst issue across London's rivers, I would say. I mean, it's difficult to know. We've got misconnections, we've got cross connections where sewers and surface waters are linked, and if the sewer gets blocked, it goes into the surface water. We've got CSOs, we've got roads, we've got lots of problems in London's rivers, but misconnections may be the biggest one. And I'd like to think it could be solved, but it won't be solved without everybody working together and taking some part in the process.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts, did you want to come in here?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I think to an extent we've touched a lot on it. This is a question for Rob. The question is, from your experience of misconnections in the Crane Valley, what's needed to improve enforcement of misconnections? And at the moment, it doesn't seem as though there's anybody really holding the ring in terms of enforcement.
I think the enforcement issue has been passed around. I think various organisations probably have some powers to do it if they had the desire and wherewithal. I mean, Thames Water have some powers. They would argue that maybe Environment Agency have some powers but don't have the desire to do anything that they classify as level 3 pollution. And the local authorities have some powers but often aren't using them. Some local authorities are very good. Other local authorities are really quite poor, to be perfectly honest. I think what I would like to see is for those 3 organisations to come together and say, we've all got some powers, we all want to see this fixed. How are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve this together? I think the GLA potentially have a role here in terms of hand-holding the local authorities, pointing them towards best practice that has been delivered by some of the local authorities, and maybe providing some kind of advisory for the local authorities, some of which have said they're not going to deal with it because they know that they don't have a strict statutory obligation. but haven't realised that actually it's not going to cost that as much money as they think it is. They think that, and particularly if it was dealt with in the round with those two other agencies.
Thank you. Thames 21 gave us some written evidence earlier in this investigation. They've suggested that there should be a GLA misconnections officer. Obviously, sorry? Oh, sorry. Noise is off. Obviously, from what you've just said, you'd be supportive of such a role?
I think the GLA potentially have a role if they wanted to take it on in terms of coordination, yes. And it has been talked about. It was even talked about that Thames Water would fund somebody. Sorry, Alex, but that was just before COVID. It was talked about, and I've asked for an update on that. I haven't heard anything about it. At the moment, I think the problem is that the misconnections problem we suspect is getting worse. You know, we've been doing quite a lot of comms around misconnections and getting quite a lot of traction, and it's partly because when people find out about it, they're really shocked. I mean, you know, we've found 7 blocks of flats which are entirely misconnected. Blocks of flats with 20, 30, 40 units in them, and it's all going into the river. And one of which was first found in 2018, and nothing has been done about it. That's 7 years of a whole block of flats pumping everything that comes out of the toilet, everything that comes out of the shower, washing machine goes into the river. And it's because we've got inertia. I mean, really, that shouldn't be happening in London, but it is because there's inertia in the system.
Thank you. Alex, sorry to put you on the spot, but it was suggested that maybe Thames Water might like to fund such a role. What do you think?
I would venture this is, you know, we're doing our bit. We're funding the ZSL to do these outfall safaris, to identify them. We've got our surface water outfall programme team who are trying to identify where the misconnection's happening. We're leading it right to the front door of you know, the properties. We think this is where we pass responsibility to the local authorities. You know, if they're not prioritising it, I don't see it's for us to pick up that tab. Maybe there is more we could do and we could explore, and I think, you know, but I don't think we should be picking up the tab for local authorities not delivering something that is part of their remit.
Okay, thank you. Any further from any of the other panels? Sorry, Chair, I appreciate we're short on time.
If I may, without wanting to sound like a broken record, but I will repeat myself, but give a specific example. As long as an organisation, a utility, is indebted by 19 billion, possibly about to go up, and paying between 5 and 10%, sometimes 12% interest, that's even the lowest level. You're looking at 1 to 2 billion a year in debt that's going out of the system. Just imagine what London could do with that money. Whereas at the moment, the Mayor and others are having to scrabble around for a few million just to do a little bit of tidying up around the edges. So fundamentally, if we restructure this organisation and give it a proper target to achieve these admirable aims of the Mayor's, then I think we'll see change. And when I say if you've got Londoners in this room here, I'd like to know how many would disagree with this statement. They want to see Thames Water sorted out, and then people like Alex can actually get on and do his job. Because until that happens, we will not see the change. I do appreciate we need cross-party collaboration and cross-industry, cross-sector. Totally agree with that. But ultimately, there's one major culprit, and they need to be helped. And the only way they can do that is if they're not saddled by massive amounts of debt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ross, anything?
And just want to sort of recognise the picture Rob is picturing, that we're often the receiving end of all the issues, and as a charity have to pick up the tab. You know, we had a major incident in Walsall that hit the headlines where sort of negligence of a third party has polluted the canal, closed the canal in Walsall, and we've got a tab of 500,000 that is yet sort of little prospect of recouping any of those costs. Likewise, we've had incidents across London of cooking oil in Alperton, for instance, last February, across a 6-mile stretch that we then had to come and clear up. And again, are reliant very much on the Environment Agency and others in helping to identify and then prosecute anybody to help us recoup our costs.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move on to water quality for bathing and recreation. So I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to James. You've previously undertaken water quality testing along the Thames on the route of the boat race. which found levels far below the minimum bathing standard. What's the latest update on that, please?
Well, thank you for asking. There will be more news to come ahead of the next boat race. Whether the numbers exactly have fluctuated not much, we won't know until the testing is done. What we saw last year was almost a perfect storm. We had the Environment Agency publishing the annual results for the water industry, which showed pretty devastating results for Thames Water and other water companies. We saw Thames Water going through yet another round of troubles with finances. We saw British Rowing and River Action and the Rivers Trust coming together to issue guidance. I mean, imagine this. Not-for-profit organisations having to give guidance to Oxford and Cambridge teams so they don't get really sick. And then what happened? 3 out of 8, men's 8, were really sick. I mean, that is absolutely outrageous. And just bear in mind, they're not swimming, they're rowing. Now, if one of those people had an open wound on their hand, and if you know anything about rowing, but if you do, your hands are open wounds. If you get E. coli or other nasties in there, you can get sepsis, you can die. And there will be people who have already died at the hands of Thames Water. No one can prove it. And I'm not making that specific legal accusation in this moment, but it's very likely that has happened, and we cannot have that continue in the future. So if we have international boat races that are watched all around the world, Henley Regatta upstream as well, where we have swimmers up and downstream putting their lives at risk, that is not acceptable. And similarly, if you're an angler and you prick your finger, and I'm an angler and I do it all the time, you can get ill from doing that. If you are a dog walker, if your child is paddling in a river. So the risk to human health is very, very considerable. So we will be doing further investigations this year, and we'll be making sure that the data, as we did previously, is up and downstream of known outflows, which we can show absolutely without question that the E. coli levels are higher downstream, which we can guarantee will be the case. And just on a personal note before I end, I went for a swim after Henley Regatta on the 8th of July, and I was violently ill for the next week, thanks to Thames Water. And I did water testing just downstream of where I was swimming, and which was downstream of the sewage treatment works, and it was coming out at 4,000 CFUs. So this has got to stop, and the only way they can do that is if we help them with refinancing and putting a proper governance structure in place.
Perhaps you should have tested the water before you got in it.
Well, we did, and I still did it. It was foolish me, but I do believe I have a right to swim.
Yeah, OK.
Sorry, Assemblyman Prince, I think Alex wanted to come in too.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, sorry. I just wanted to take exception to the point of died at the hands of Thames Water. That's a very powerful statement, and that would imply that somehow we've been funded and permitted to improve water quality to the standards of which it would be swimmable. We are not either of those. So that feels to me like a very inflammatory statement, and potentially one that I'd like to see expanded upon.
May I respond in that case, since you have picked it up? Whether you're permitted to do something or not is not the question. The permitting is incorrect, and I agree with that. The pollution is coming from your organisation, and we all know that people are putting their health and lives at risk, and it is unacceptable, and it is very likely that somebody has perished because of pollution by water companies. And I don't think that's an inflammatory statement of truth. It's absolutely likely. How can it not be, bearing in mind the levels of pollution in the river? The fact that it's not provable in court does not make it a point that can't be made. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not making a legal statement here. I'm not saying we're going to sue Thames Water or anything like that for something like that. But we do need to understand that we are talking about a very, very serious issue here. Human health is paramount concern, and your organisation does not acknowledge it. And your response, if I may so, Alex, shows how little you care. Thank you.
I'm wary of getting into a back and forth, but Alex, I think you should have a right to reply, and then I'll get back to
Just to reiterate the point, all I'm saying is, at the moment, our permits do not include a requirement to reduce bacterial levels in the river. Our permits determine how we are funded. Okay, so saying that therefore we are then liable. I'm not saying that people won't have got ill from being in the river, absolutely not, and I'm not saying that the rivers are perfect and we don't have any role to play. I'm simply saying that we are funded to deliver our permits. Our permits do not currently include water quality requirements outside designated bathing areas, for which we have none in areas that we discharge to at the moment, and therefore saying at the hands of Thames Water is incorrect and inflammatory.
If I might, I think you're kind of both agreeing with each other, and that's why the system isn't working. But Keith, sorry, Assemblyman Prince.
Call me what you like. Been called worse. So, won't be the first time. James, so what do you think? I want to ask you a couple more questions, but what do you think it would take to and I better remind people what we were talking about, i.e. the Henley Regatta. Sorry, no, the water race, the boat race. What would it take for that part of the Thames to be routinely safe, have routinely safe levels for recreation, do you think?
Well, I think it's very important that Thames Water is allowed to raise the investment that's required to deliver their business plan. But I think it's also important that bill payers should not be doing so. So if you read the press from the water industry, not just Thames Water, but the press, including Water UK, that represents the water industry, have used phrases like, the water industry are investing in, and then... But let's just put this straight. That is factually accurate in that the water industry is financed privately, funding is raised, and then that is used to cash flow and investment. But they're doing it for profit. If we had it in a different model, then all that money that is going out in the form of dividends and interest payments would be used for servicing us as customers and investing in the network. So in order for us to clean up the water around Putney, Hammersmith and other areas where the boat race happens, we need to see very significant investment. I think we should also not forget, if I may quickly bring up the subject of water scarcity. Thames Water wastes 600 million litres of drinking water a day. Across the country, it's between 3 and 4 billion. This is a frightening situation. As I mentioned when Leonie was hosting last time, a year and a half ago, the Thames Water themselves, I think it was back in around 2017, stated that it would cost the London economy about £330 million a day if we run out of water. Now, imagine those figures now. So, again, with business plans, what we'd like to see is investment in fixing leaky water as well. So, yes, of course, we need new reservoirs, and we need wetlands too. And I mentioned beavers earlier. I was a co-founder of the Beaver Trust, and I'm very keen to see that I'm very pleased that the Mayor is backing the beaver, as Boris once said. So, if we could have a serious talk as well, and I don't know if we have time today, but looking at water scarcity, we must not forget that. Pollution is a big issue, but when London runs out of water, our economy dries up. When Britain runs out of water, we cannot grow crops. We will run out of food. And do you think those greenhouses that are being flattened in Almeria in Spain are going to be asking themselves if they can feed Brits as they rebuild? No, they will not. They will be thinking about themselves. So we need to think about food security and water security too. And I believe the water industry, including Thames Water, has a very significant role to play there. And investment in fixing leaky pipes will be a very good way to start.
Thank you. Just one more aside. You said that you tested the water outside. People, I don't know why, but people swim in that water outside. Would you swim in that water outside?
Not after testing 15,000 CFUs, because that would make me very sick if that got into my mouth and I ingested it, and I've already mentioned what it can do and cause sepsis. I think there's a rights issue here. As Londoners, as Brits, we have a right to use our rivers, we have a right to clean water, and it is incumbent upon government and industry to fulfil that. As long as the industry is privatised, then it's up to those privatised organisations to deliver on it. And I don't think it's too much to ask that people within the city and up and downstream of here should have that right fulfilled. As far as the longer term is concerned, if we can see in 9 years' time that it's swimmable, I would be amazed if it is, but I would be absolutely thrilled, and sooner too, if we could have that. But even just to be able to use that term, if I can't even remember how you could put it, but paddleable, or whatever the right word was, if we could have people just safely kayaking and rowing, that would be a very good start. But we need to have high ambitions here, and public and human health has got to be right up at the top of the list.
So just one final question. Do you think that there should be some kind of mandatory or central publishing of the levels of pollution so people can at least make that decision themselves whether or not they want to swim in a polluted area?
Well, interestingly, Alex points out rightly about the permitting, that it isn't required. Thames Water is not required to go beyond a certain level of removal of pathogens and so on, bacteria, viruses, and including microplastics and so on that come through the system. So as long as those permits are remained at a low primary and secondary level of cleaning, and without having the tertiary and quaternary, and by that we're talking about UV treatment and other filtering processes, then it's going to be very, very difficult. So what we are calling upon, again, for the Mayor and the Secretary of State and the Water Minister, Emma Hardy, is to look at permits where, particularly in bathing areas, upstream of bathing areas, or other water use areas where, for example, you have Henley Regatta, we have swimming and rowing, that we'd have upstream treatment works going to a tertiary or quaternary level. And again, that happens as common practice across Europe. If you look in France, they have 573 inland bathing sites. We have less than 20. That says it all, doesn't it?
With all due respect, James, you didn't quite answer the question. Didn't really quite answer the question, although all the points you made were very relevant. Do you think there should be some kind of central database where people can just check to see what the latest?
Yes, I do, absolutely. So what we're seeing now, I mentioned sewage map earlier, so we now have a system where you can have visibility of sewage spills, but until we have permits changed, the water companies are not going to be required. I'm sorry if I didn't clarify this, forgive me. The E. coli levels are not necessarily monitored for public digestion. So unless you have a bathing site, a fishery, a water abstraction, a water company is not required under their permit to be able to monitor the nasties, those bugs we're talking about. So the permitting needs to change in order for that monitoring to happen. But yes, of course, we'd welcome that, particularly in spots where we're seeing a high level of water usage.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm fine. Did you say someone wanted to come?
Sally Member-Cooper wants to come. Sally Member-Cooper.
Thank you. I represent Merton and Wandsworth, which obviously includes Putney. So I've been to the boat race on many occasions. It's incredibly exciting. But I only see the beginning. It's Gareth who gets to see the end in his constituency. But, it's used all the time. It's not just once a year for the boat race, although that's the one that gets all the coverage and is the elite athletes. There are rowing clubs along, the embankment in Putney where people go in and out of the water all the time. There's huge encouragement for local people to be involved in recreation. In terms of this monitoring, I'm not sure from what Alex is saying, that it's ever going to be something that is going to be taken on by Thames Water in that location. Is this something that the Environment Agency should be doing? I mean, I like the live map where we can see if there are live sewage spills on the Thames Water system. But shouldn't we actually not just be monitoring, for particular spills? We should be monitoring all the time, every day, not just for the elite sport, although I do want to see that, of course, safe and sound.
Well, yes, I couldn't agree more. However, they're not funded to do so. The Environment Agency are not funded to do so, and it is not incumbent upon them. Even in the Water Industry Act, the regulators do not even have an environmental duty. They have a duty to customers and to the water company to make a reasonable return. So as long as we have an act that doesn't actually imply an environmental duty to Ofwat and the Environment Agency, and therefore to be able to hold water companies to account, then that's going to continue. I would also question why organisations like mine and River Action and community groups like Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, Fulham Reach Boat Club, they're all doing tests. They have some very swanky kit that we've bought for them, or they've invested in themselves, from Fluidian, which was used in the Paris Olympics. You may remember that the triathlon was delayed and the kit that was used there was very accurate. But even now, if we look at the lab testing that's done by the EA and by water companies, it uses very archaic systems of manual counts looking at agar dishes. So it's pretty prehistoric in its technology, whereas we now have technologies which use laser systems that are far more accurate and give a much more worrying picture. I won't go into the details of technicalities now, although I'm very happy to talk offline. But so fundamentally, not only is the testing not happening, it's being done by not-for-profit groups and communities and rowing clubs and swimming clubs.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I noticed that last year the testing mainly seemed to be coming from what I would probably characterise as sort of voluntary sector interested parties. And, we still ended up with 3 people getting very ill. And obviously it was, a major headline, because obviously the cox is normally thrown in by the successful rowing aid at the end of the race. Don't throw your cox in. Don't get in the water yourselves. And so probably you'll be doing testing again for the elite rowing race again this year. And I'm just wondering, it sounds to me as though there's a gap here that nobody is responsible for doing regular monitoring.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That nobody is responsible unless, as I mentioned, under permitting it's required because of a bathing water site. But there is none around here. And we have them upstream in Wallingford and Oxford, of course. So, unfortunately, the legislation, both the combination of the permitting and then the lack of bathing water sites, or we could call them, leisure uses. There are various different terms that could expand it beyond swimming, but to make sure it's not just elite sports.
Swimming, we're talking paddling, we're talking rowing, we're talking leisure use of the rivers across the country, but mainly here talking about the Thames. Alex, do you think it should be monitored on a regular basis by Thames Water or other water companies? I'm just struck that, the rivers don't belong to the water companies, and I'm just wondering whether it should be the Environment Agency or somebody else instead of the water companies, rather than nobody.
I think it's a classic example of where numerous people need to come together to create a shared plan and deliver it. So we have a requirement to now install what are called continuous water quality monitors. We have to install them on 25% of our sewage treatment outfalls and combined sewer overflows by the end of 2030, and all of them by the following 2035. We have a plan for that, but again, they are around the parameters that our permits are regulated, so things like biological oxygen demand, ammonia, that sort of thing, not on measuring coliform units, etc. We are looking at, in installing these, can we also install, leave a space in the machinery to do that monitoring using technologies such as Fluidian, etc. I have to say Fluidian isn't as accurate as a proper lab-based sample, but for an in situ, it gives you a steer as to the general level. So certainly we think we've got part of the opportunity to measure, and we think the citizen science approach is also really has a role to play, and we think bringing that together in the same way that, say, the Met Office has its own weather stations, and then there are weather watchers who input data and create a much fuller picture. So there is an opportunity to coordinate that, and I believe that UCWIR, the UK Water Industry Research, is looking at how would you build a platform that enables all of those players to contribute, so river leisure users can make informed choices about when and where to go in terms of water quality. I would still argue there is some fundamental lacking science in understanding how pathogens thrive and die in river water according to weather, temperature, where in the river profile you are. So in the mid-channel, in the shallows where you're paddling, you're going to see different levels, and that's something that needs to be better understood. I also think there is lacking science about, actually what is the level of pathogens that will lead to poor health in different types of people. So the benchmark that we is generally used for bathing is a bit arbitrary. I think there is better science that needs to happen, and that science needs to be owned by the proper health organisations and given to us. It's not for us as a water company to determine what is healthy. But we do think we have a role to play in monitoring and contributing to that picture.
OK, I was sort of trying to find out whether you thought the Environment Agency seemed to be talking about the health side of things. And actually, Rob, I'm just going to ask Ros, if I may, who would you look to do this monitoring of rivers to make sure that they are sufficiently healthy, notwithstanding the points that Alex was just making about whether or not we've actually got the science to really understand whether we even understand what we're looking at?
I think certainly
I think there is a threshold above which we really shouldn't be going, regardless of different parts of the river.
I think certainly at the moment the Canal and River Trust sort of does monitoring when we're aware of pollution incidents and things, but we don't as a whole do regular monitoring. Where we have supported bathing sites, we do monitoring. So for instance, the Canary Wharf group, we supported them swimming in Middle Dock at Docklands, so that's now on a long lease. So we sort of support localised testing. As a whole, we would look to others to sort of support us and help with that information and monitoring, because we ourselves don't have the resource, but again, sort of working in partnership would see a role in supporting others to do that.
Sure. Okay. I mean, Chair, it just strikes me that, moving towards swimmable rivers, you've actually got to monitor continuously all the time to make sure that it's safe for ordinary Londoners, as well as making sure that on boat race day it's safe for those elite athletes as well. Thank you.
I think well said. I've had indications from James and Rob. James, I kind of want to just say this is a social justice issue too, right? And I met a group of women last year who were doing citizen science, and they were measuring water levels, but the amount of time and effort they were giving to it was incredible, but not everyone has that space and time to be able to do that kind of work.
Yeah. Just quickly just for clarity, the Fluidian testing that I mentioned is World Health Organization approved. It was used by the Olympic Committee, and it's far more accurate than standard lab results. We can talk about that offline, Alex. There's a lack of duty of care. So it's something that we will be making quite a lot of noise about this summer. Ultimately, and this is, I do agree with you, Alex, that currently the Environment Agency, the way I'd characterise it is unless you're a fish, they don't care. And I don't mean that to sound quite as ridiculous as it sounds, but fundamentally, that is their job, to protect wildlife, to not protect people necessarily, unless there's bathing water status, as I mentioned. If you're the Department of Health, then unless you are seriously ill and hospitalised, then you might go to the UK HSA. And if there's a waterborne disease outbreak in your drinking water, then there's an incident. But if it's rivers or in the sea, in fact, there is no duty of care. And one of the things that we found most outrageous about this wonderful country we live in is that there is no government department that actively holds up its hand to say, we care about you swimmers, rowers, dog walkers, anglers, and so on, unless there's, as I said, this bathing water site, which is only, 15 or whatever it is across the whole of England. So until we have a government department that is equipped and given the responsibility to stand up for our health and make sure that polluters are held to account, then how are we going to protect ourselves? Who cares? That's our question.
Thank you. Rob.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need a bit of a reality check, actually. I've spent 35 years working in rivers. I'm in the river every week doing river restoration work. I also row, so I'm out on the river every week, certainly in the summer, every month in the winter. I take precautions. I don't expect the river to be bacteriologically free. Inevitably, there are bacteria in the river. It's a living organism, and bacteria are living organisms. It's a living organism with lots of animals in it. I mean, we're not going to get rid of all the rats, I'm afraid, from the rivers of London. Rats carry Weil's disease. Weil's disease kills you. So anybody who goes into a river in London or anywhere else needs to take precautions. They can't just assume they can splash around and then go and have their tea, or they can swallow river water and always get away with it. It's just the nature of rivers. So I do think we need a bit of a reality check on all this.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. This one's for Thames Water. I mean, in your submission to the committee, it's stated that investment in potential bathing water sites is highly unlikely for 4 to 5 years. Now, we could go on about the debt again and what could be achieved if we didn't have that. But what conversations have you had about potential new bathing water locations in London, such as those identified in the Mayor's Outdoor Swimming Guide, and what would be needed to get these up to bathing water standards?
So in our standard submission, we said that we don't think we're going to be delivering in the next 5 years because none have been previously identified and then therefore weren't part of our PR24 business plan covering the 2025 to 2030 period. Also, DEFRA is now consulting on bathing river standards. That consultation carries on until spring, and therefore it's probably going to be a year before the guidance is produced, a year for communities to make submissions for potential areas for bathing, and then at least one season's monitoring to understand the water quality there. So therefore, it's very unlikely new sites are going to come forward before 2030. If they do come forward, then in London, we will consider those as part of our PR29 business plan and put funding requests to Ofwat, depending on the water quality. You know, the water quality has to be poor or worse in order for us to be able to invest. We need to understand what are the sources of those pollutions. So Wolvercote, for example, one of the bathing water quality areas requesting designation in our area, we've been studying that, and we find that there are so many different sources of pollution. Whatever we did wouldn't make a manifest difference on the water quality there. Not saying we're not going to make it, but just saying it's a really complex picture. So, basically we need DEFRA to come forward with the guidance. I suspect that the Mayor's Roundtable might be helpful in bringing together the key partners and identifying where do Londoners want to swim, and then we can work up from that. But that was the reason that there is currently no plans in the next 5-year period to invest in bathing sites in London.
Thank you. One of the particular areas of concern on my patch, which is Richmond, Kingston and Hounslow, is regarding the current open water swimming activities which happen at Teddington. And you'll be aware of the plans for the Teddington Direct River Abstraction Scheme, which is being proposed, which will see 75 million litres of water removed from the Thames and then replaced with treated effluent from the Mogden sewage works. According to Save Our Lands and Rivers, SOLAR, they claim that the Thames Water have confirmed they will not be removing pharmaceuticals such as hormones, painkillers and antibiotics from the treated effluent. And these could contain contaminants like PFAs and PFOs, forever chemicals, that are suspected as being carcinogenic. And we're still waiting to hear, I understand, whether Thames Water will be planning to reduce the presence of bacteria, viruses and parasites from the effluent, which could include fecal contaminants such as E. coli, salmonella and coronavirus. Do you think that this particular plan is conducive to encouraging open water swimming in Teddington?
So just I think perhaps for everyone's information, so the point of the Teddington River abstraction is it's a drought scheme, drought resilient scheme to ensure that London has enough water during sustained long periods of dry weather. So what we do is we are going to take water from above Teddington Weir, 75 million litres a day, under the careful watch of the Environment Agency when we're in a designated defined drought period, pump that to our reservoirs in the Lee Valley. And because the volume of water coming over Teddington Weir is a critical factor for the Environment Agency, we're going to replace that water by taking highly treated effluent, treated to much higher standards than it currently is, and put it back in just above Teddington Weir. So effectively, the river doesn't feel the difference in terms of volume. We are going to be putting tertiary treatment onto that effluent, so it will be much higher than what would be coming in normally, currently, below Teddington Weir from Mogden's outfalls. So it is going to be of a much higher standard than what goes into the lower Thames below Teddington Weir. Now, the impact on, we don't think that's going to have a terribly significant impact on swimming, because actually the volume is the same and the treatment of the water is very high.
Just on the issue regarding waiting to hear from Thames Water regarding whether they do plan to reduce the levels of bacteria and similar nasties, when do you expect us to get the response on that? It may have already come out, and this may be slightly...
I don't know. I'm going to have to come back to you. I'm aware that it's a nationally significant infrastructure project, and there are different pathways that goes through. So if I can get back to you with a fuller answer on the level of treatment there and when the decision will be made.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Alex, I don't expect you to actually know the answer to this, but you might be able to, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way in any way at all. But you may or may not have seen a recent BBC expose about the Rivers Trust discovering an illegal sewage outlet into the River Roding, which is from your good selves. Can you tell us what Thames, are you aware of that, and what are Thames planning to do to rectify that? So I use the word illegal because the BBC used it. It's not my word.
I'm not aware of that specific one or that specific programme. I am aware that we have through the Surface Water Programme, outfall programme, we have been working to identify all outfalls into all rivers. It's a constant battle because there were a lot of things that were done before privatisation that simply weren't mapped. So we work to try and identify where these are. And citizen science, such as the ZSL outfall safaris, have been absolutely magnificent in helping to detect these. And we've got various other things. When we find one of these, what are called unconsented CSOs, we have a project that then looks at, well, how often does it happen? What is it connected to? So is it an overflow from a sewer, or is it a polluted surface water outfall? We then look at, can we seal it off? And if we were to seal it off, what impact would that have in the network? Would it lead to flooding elsewhere or other problems? And if there is a solution, what is the alternative solution if we can't seal it off? So do we need a tank? Do we need to go upstream and correct misconnections, etc.? So on the Roding, I think I've got the stats here. There are a number that we're working through. I think there are 5 that we are currently looking at. What is the cause? What is the impact? What is the solution? And we aim to have a response to the Environment Agency on each of those by the end of March this year. That said, it is a constant battle. We're constantly finding new ones, or existing ones that weren't polluted are now becoming polluted because of misconnections. So it's a constant battle. But if you could let me know which specific one it is, I will look into it.
And could you share that with the committee, your report to the Environment Agency?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final section, Improving Rivers for People and Nature, Assembly Member Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, we'll start with Rob and then go to Alex on these ones. So again, starting with Rob, how has the smarter catchment approach allowed you to bring in additional funding for river improvement?
Thank you. Well, we started, as I said before, we think the UK's first urban smarter catchment in 2020. So we received £3 million of funding from Thames Water, and the funding was given to the partnership, and the investment was allocated by the partnership over that 5-year period. And first of all, developing a plan as to how that money was going to be invested. One of the really interesting things about this programme is that it has allowed us to identify and bring in more funding, and to actually also identify existing funding that we wouldn't otherwise have known about, and talk to those funders, talk to those programmes, and work with those programmes to help us meet our 5 key themes. So actually, we identified around about 25 million of additional funding, either brought in through developing the programme or identified as a result of the programme. So we identified 5 themes that we wanted to work with: water quality, biodiversity, community, including access and recreation, flooding, and geomorphology, river form. And we have theme leads running against those 5 themes, and they're delivering well over 100 projects. We've done around about 60 or 70 projects with community groups, and we've got a really healthy network of community groups that are all linked together and working on that programme. And as I said at the start, it's the first programme, it's the first time I've felt really enthused and enthusiastic around urban rivers, that there is a way of bringing all the different partners together, because it doesn't sit with any one organisation, it's shared in partnership, it's to do with overlapping areas of responsibility, it's to do with all the partners pulling together and working together, it's to do with everybody doing what they can, basically. And it changes mindsets. It changes the way that people see problems. They can see that the problems are shared. And in urban settings, these problems are really complex. And therefore, to my mind, it's the only way forward is to work at a catchment scale, community-focused and partnership-based.
Thank you for that. Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
Clearly, yes. I mean, we think this is absolutely the way forward. Once you get away from the big engineering works on our works. So, as Rob said, the Crane is one of 3 partnerships that we fund. We're waiting for the outcome of the decision on the final determination for how much more further we can fund them. We've certainly funded for the next year, so we can make sure Rob and his team have got resources to keep going, and we'd very much like to fund them continuously. We'd like to expand the programme to all of our catchments, and we've done some work to look at how we would scale it up. But again, it comes a bit back to our regulators looking at for end-of-pipe grey infrastructure solutions rather than partnership solutions. So, we are slightly limited on that, but where we can deliver better alternative solutions via green and community measures, we are certainly keeping our momentum up on that. I think this is the only way we're going to crack this problem. I also think that, we need to be reaching Londoners. We need to be empowering Londoners to understand the impact they are having and the solutions in their control. And this goes for surface water flooding as well as mist connections and sewer abuse. And if we can connect Londoners through the actions of the people on here, let's face it, they are better advocates of the message than potentially we are. People are going to listen to them more before us. If we can get Londoners on side and get them to do their bit, and we can do our bit, then we can make those changes.
Thank you. So going back to Rob then on this and then to Alex, are you confident that there is enough funding for biodiversity projects, and should there be more provision from the Mayor of London or ring-fenced provision from the government?
I'd really like the GLA to be more involved in river partnership working. I think it's a really interesting model. I think there are lots of partners out there already. You won't be left holding the baby, but you will kind of have the opportunity to get involved and get a sense of how catchment partnership working can improve our rivers, not only our rivers, but our open spaces and the way that people interact with them, which leads to all sorts of other benefits, all kinds of socio-economic benefits as well. So, yeah, I really hope the GLA can get involved. I don't have a sense of how it might happen particularly. I think in the first instance, it's getting to know how the system is working at the moment and then getting a sense of what areas you want to contribute to.
So for me, it's about leveraging all the existing funding. There is a considerable amount of funding already existing. It's just potentially not used to its fullest effect. So if we can leverage our funding, air quality funding, biodiversity net gain funding, placemaking funding, Section 106, whatever, if we can get that into a more coherent package with more confident availability, then we can make some really big changes. At the moment, the bidding processes are unaligned. There's a high risk that if you bid for it, you won't get it. If you're building a complex funding structure, we've got multiple sources, and one of them doesn't come through, the whole house of cards comes down. So I think the GLA definitely have a role in helping us build that structure and in addressing some of those uncertainties. And I think the Mayor could certainly provide some leveraging funding to help address that. So we can then, if you've got one confident pillar, it helps you then build the rest of the programme. And I think that would be critical. I keep saying that ultimately our sewers don't care what bit of sustainable drainage is connected to it. So if it's a hedge improving air quality, if it's a butterfly meadow creating, biodiversity net gain, or if it's a, beautiful tree creating placemaking, our sewers don't care what the attachment is. They feel the surface water benefit, which may benefit the pollution or flooding, but it's about how we leverage those other forms of funding to get that project to happen and happen at scale.
Can I just add, actually, I mean, fundamentally, what we've always found with this, it's not lack of money. It's lack of coordination sometimes, it's lack of knowledge sometimes, it's lack of opportunity sometimes. Money generally isn't the issue. So I wouldn't be asking GLA to get involved because I want your money. It's more, I think your coordinating powers and the way that you function in relation to all the local authorities is your USP.
Yeah, just add that obviously we're a delivery plant, we're on the ground. We're absolutely keen to work with partners, and funding is a key consideration for us. But we've got access to the sort of 100 kilometres, to improve biodiversity, to improve access, and get people out to really benefit from being by blue and green space.
Thank you for that. My final questioning is directed to Alex on this, which is in your submission. You mentioned a target of a 5% increase in biodiversity at 253 of your most important sites. So the question is, do you feel that is ambitious enough? And can you elaborate on some of the examples of how you're going to achieve this target?
So I would say yes, it is. But I would say it's going to be challenging because actually we manage a lot of our sites for biodiversity already. And therefore, a lot of these sites, we now need to increase their capacity, either to meet growth or to meet new permit requirements. So in some areas, we're going to have to be building on sites that are already biodiversity rich. And through the biodiversity net gain planning requirement, we've got to up them again. So we're going to have to be building on, wildflower meadows or established hedgerows. So that makes it very, very challenging. And so what we're looking at is actually where can we do that? How do we also, one of the things we're keen to look at is could we create a biodiversity gain bank where we've got opportunities to create additional biodiversity net gain, we can then work with other partners to trade at a catchment level. So either we can do what we need, we can use that biodiversity bank to improve areas where we need to do work, or we can have a surplus that we provide to others that then provides additional funding to keep that existing network going. So it is challenging, and as I say, it's challenging because we're starting from quite a high base. We have got funding in the next 5-year period to deliver it, And what's more, Ofwat have also directed that we need to be ensuring that those sites we are creating are resilient to climate change. So we'll be looking very much about how they're going to be resilient to drought or flood or whatever. So, yes.
Thank you. Just say to the committee, I'm aware that we're running behind time. Thank you very much all for staying. And also to the second panel, thank you for your patience. We'll be with you in a moment. Finally, Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, first of all, James, you talked about the numbers of bathing sites, formal bathing sites. France, I think you quoted between 500 and 600. You then said, in comparison, England has less than 20. According to the government, there's 451. So where's the discrepancy between the numbers that you quoted before? And
they're talking about coastal sites. So that
includes Hampstead Heath and Serpentine.
On rivers, there are, I think it's 15. 15. Okay. Yeah, it's less than 20. Yeah.
Right. Then moving on to the going back to the questions that Thomas, Assembly Member Turrell, had started with in terms of improving water quality. So we've heard in terms of the sewage discharge, and Alex, you've talked about, I mean, all three of you have actually talked about the funding situation. So, Alex, you said that actually the funding is there, but it's not necessarily spent in the best way. Clearly, and I think we've all talked about the GLA having that leading role. If the money is not being spent as best as possible currently, would you be willing, in terms of water, to put your money into a pool where perhaps the GLA or another lead partner would then make sure that it was allocated out in a strategic way to deliver the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
That's funny. It's exactly the conversation Pete Dorr and I were having just before we met over coffee. I mean, I would like to come back. I don't think, you know, there is always a need for more money. I think the existing money could be better utilised, but when we start to look at these targets of 7,000 hectares of land, impermeable land disconnected to SUDS, we are going to need much more money. But I do think that there is an opportunity in leveraging all those pots, bringing them together, giving confidence in their availability of funding and having a clear plan for delivering it that will enable us to create a new quantum of delivery. And certainly Pete and I need to have many more conversations about how that could work. We also think there's a role for, say, the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Funding to come into play. They ran a pilot scheme called Prosper, which was looking at how do we support communities and local authorities in delivering local small-scale SUDS in a way that you can make use of quick opportunities as they come, rather than having to go through an unwieldy 6 months to 1 year bidding process to get normal TRFCC funding. So we think there's lots of opportunities to create a ready pot, and maybe that will, with all partners contributing, and that could deliver some big wins.
So that's something currently in the offing. Anything that we need to do to ensure that we get that over the line?
I think we need to. I think it's in discussion, certainly. I keep hating to keep returning to our final determination. We need to see how much money we've got, what we've got to hit, and what happens when we don't hit what we need to hit, and the penalties we need to pay.
Sure. So just to pause you there for a second. So a lot of people have obviously raised the issue of surface water runoff.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of what do we need to see from utility companies? You're saying about sort of the rolling work that gets done on our roads, day to day, week to week. What needs to change in order to support from a water runoff position?
So what I think we need a clear understanding of how much water we need to remove at a catchment level in order to get to an acceptable level of flood risk. We need to identify where are the best locations for that to happen, and then we need to understand what are the mechanisms to deliver that. So with the example of the SUDS through Streetworks project I gave, we've identified how one intervention through utility, mains renewal, etc., can be delivered. We then need to look at what are the other big steps you've got to change land cover. So new development, can we get improved greenfield runoff rates from new development, for example, secured in the London plan? Can we get some commitment when we're retrofitting development to put in SUDS? And what mechanisms would you need to deliver that? So it's got to be that whole panoply of opportunities has got to be examined. Look at where we've got existing levers to deliver SUDS, and look where the gaps are.
I'm just going to go back to the smarter catchment areas, and there's one for the River Wandle in South London. So It's been highlighted by Fergal Sharkey and others in terms of the pollution that's gone into the River Wandle from the Thames. Obviously, we've got the Thames Tideway now, which is coming into play and has already started to take pollution out of the River Thames, but potentially into streams and chalk streams like the River Wandle. We were promised a chalk stream recovery plan back in 2023 for the Wandle. When do we expect to see plans like that come into play and actually start to be delivered?
So yes, that's something we're working on at the moment. We have a very significant investment programme in upgrading our sewage treatment works in London and also in addressing those remaining outfall, combined sewer outfalls that are still causing pollution. So we've got, I think it's 800 million available in the next 5 years to target those outfalls, and the Wandle is one of the rivers that we're very keen to focus on. I will have to come back to you on the publication date for the Chalk Stream Action Plan, but it's certainly on my to-do list because my team own that.
That'd be really good if you could share that with the committee. Thank you. Moving to my part of the world, in Ealing, and I used to live around the corner from the beavers that got introduced in Paradise Fields. Absolutely gorgeous part of the world, and I used to use the canal actually to commute into work on my daily basis, which added significant benefits from a mental health point of view, but also to physical health point of view. I didn't row, to be honest. I was cycling along the towpath, but we've seen the mayor going back to the funding. The mayor and obviously the deputy mayor who's just come in to the room has visited the investment that was made by the CRT, Ros, £700,000 of funding from the Mayor's Green and Resilient Spaces Fund for the Southall Grand Union Canal Wellbeing Way. How important is funding like that to ensure that we're delivering large-scale projects like the one that we've got there in Southall?
Yes, absolutely critical. Our sort of funding is reducing, central funding is reducing from government and our grant from 2027, so we're ever more reliant on external sources, and it's been a fantastic project. The South Boring Way enabled us to work with partners, the local authority, the housing associations, to really activate the space, get more people seeing the canal as a place for them and reaping the benefits of being out out in nature, and got a long-term sustainable legacy with the volunteering support and the partnership that we've been able to grow as part of that. But that funding was absolutely critical, enabling us to bring all those partners together and launch that project, which will have a sustainable impact on the local area. So absolutely fundamental.
As well as the funding, what you talked about some of those partnerships there. What is the fundamental sort of recipe to making sure that these are successful projects?
I think funding first, and then the partnerships, working and finding similar organisations who can bring their resource. So again, I mentioned we worked with the local authority, we worked with the local housing association, and we also worked with other volunteer associations to bring all that resource, that energy together. The connections into the community as well are absolutely critical then to make sure that the work is what people want in the local area, but then seen as building up that confidence that the area is somewhere that they can see as part of their lives. So it's been a very powerful project.
Thank you, Ros. James?
Well, just a quick point about the Wandle. Excuse me. I don't know if you're aware, but on the 8th of July, there is the UK River Summit. It's going to be hosted at Morden Hall. The Mayor and the Deputy Mayor are invited, and all of you present and anyone listening. And we'll be talking about chalk streams. I was actually on the chalk streams working group that drafted the proposal nationally and presented it to the previous government, and we were very disappointed to see that it's yet to be enacted upon. Where I live, just outside of London, on the River Kennet, we're seeing terrible problems with pollution, and we really need to see action quickly to protect it. So, and that's a combination of agriculture and sewage pollution, predominantly, dare I say it, Thames water. So, if we could see some sort of encouragement from the Mayor to get behind that sort of initiative, he'd be very welcome to come and speak at the summit, perhaps. But 8th of July, put it in your diaries.
Sounds like a date for the diary. So. Now, just going to go back to Ros and Rob. So, obviously, I talked about my experience. I used to sort of transform my commute in terms of using the canal. And obviously, we're here in London for one reason, because the River Thames exists, and actually why London was set up in the first place. Our rivers and canals are real draws for people, whether it's runners, cyclists, people on the, whether it's kayakers, paddleboarders, swimmers. In your experience, what are the best ways to make sure that people feel safe on and near the water?
Thank you. We have a very strong and well-supported education programme about water safety in particular, very much targeted through our volunteer-led programmes on school-age children in particular, very successful programme. We also do a variety of specific campaigns, Don't Drink at Drown, particular summer campaigns as well, and we're very pleased that we launched our Little Explorer programme last year, which is targeting nursery school children. So there's wonderful free resources online, including a song and a book, Quack, 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 Take 2 Steps Back. So should you'd be interested, which again promotes the safety so people can access the waterways safely, build up confidence, and then sort of go on to reap the benefits. So again, social, more active vigilance as well. Our boating community play a particularly strong role in that as well, about making thriving communities that are accessible by all as well.
Thank you. I think there's two things really. I think there's safety and then there's the perception of safety. We do surveys of public use along the river and open spaces, and we know a space is perceived to be safe when we have a 50-50 male-female ratio, and our best used spaces are 50-50, I'm really pleased to say, from first thing in the morning to last thing at night, from dawn till dusk. You're just as likely to see a woman running as a man. Our less well-used spaces, including spaces which are inherently beautiful but are really not engaged with by the public, 90-95% men, and nobody at dawn, and you feeling a little bit unsafe yourself because you're monitoring the place at dawn. So, and there's nothing inherently different about those spaces other than the level of engagement with the public and probably some superficial litter and rubbish and maybe the odd burnt out car or whatever, which gives that sense of danger. So I think there's a real opportunity to, through improving rivers and through improving open spaces, to actually bring the public back into these spaces where they're not there at the moment. And the relationship between degraded spaces and poor socioeconomic situations is very direct.
Before we bring you back in, Rob, you've started to touch upon what was going to be my final question, really, and really interesting in terms of that gender split that you talked about. But you know, one of the key themes that comes up time and time again in this conversation is how do we make sure that we are opening up our rivers and, you know, run along the river on a Sunday morning, absolutely gorgeous. You've got lots of people using it, but in terms of making sure that it's open to a more diverse cross-section of Londoners, how do we really achieve that? Ros, I'll start with you, but I'll come to you, James.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of our work is absolutely key. You know, our canals go through some of the most industrial sections of the community, so how do we access those? So again, some of our funded programmes from the People's Postcode Lottery, particularly in Tottenham and Brent, are sort of targeting the areas with the highest social deprivation, but absolutely getting communities engaged, seeing the canals as part of somewhere for them, absolutely building on that vigilance and sort of community sense that makes people feel safe and self-perpetuating, but absolutely programmes that we run. We work with different communities, Tower Hamlets, for instance, Somali women, again, sort of building up that relationship and that confidence and ultimately making sure that everyone can reap the benefits of our wonderful blue and green spaces.
Great to hear, Ros. I'm going to go to James and come back so you can have the final word, Rob. Just so I'll make sure that James doesn't get the final word.
I won't take that personally. So on the phrase elite sport was used earlier on. So the Clean Water Sports Group, which includes angling, which is certainly not an elite sport, but rowing, swimming and so on, exists, and it's been founded by British Rowing and led by them, and they give advice. So as far as safe access is concerned, we'd highly recommend contacting. So if there's 7, I think, different sports, contact them. British Rowing specifically have produced advice with River Action, as I mentioned earlier, for not throwing the cocks in the water and dressing your wounds and wiping down your blades and hull and so on. But there's advice for swimmers too. There's a very important point here. You you mentioned accessibility. Only 3% of Britain's rivers are accessible to the public. And if we think about London, obviously we'd expect higher level of accessibility because we have canal paths, streams and rivers and so on. But even still, a lot of our rivers are buried. A lot of them run along areas you really wouldn't want to walk along and may not be safe. So there's a broader question there about what the Mayor and the GLA could do to try and increase accessibility for everybody. And then finally, the point on diversity. If we look at places like Bristol and Bath, there's a group there, they happen to be swimmers, and it has an absolute 100% mix across society. It's a fantastic group, the Common Bathers. They've made a film called Rave On for the Avon. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's a beautiful film, winning awards right now. And also we see things like citizen science as a really good way of getting people involved. Obviously education through school groups, and I'm sure the Canal and Rivers Trust and others will, and I'm sure Force will probably do this too, getting people out there. So actually giving people a reason to care about your river, help people to fall in love again with the water source that sustains them.
And Rob, so just before you just talk about movies, would recommend Beavers in Paradise. Probably don't Google that.
I second that.
It's Rob, great.
Yes, Beavers in Paradise. Really interesting, actually, going back to Beavers at Paradise Fields, and one of the unexpected impacts of beavers being in Paradise Fields in Ealing is that that space, which was for many years really something disregarded space and rather degraded space and probably not very well looked after by either the local authority or the public, is now a very well-loved space. So actually the public attitude towards the space has changed because of the fact that it's deemed to be interesting and important. And we've seen that a lot. We see that a lot where kind of maybe counterintuitively, the places that are best used, where most people use the spaces, are the places with the least litter. And the places that are the least used and and are the places that are the most degraded and the most litter. And that affects how comfortable people feel about using the spaces, and how can we empower people to actually get out there, and we do this. We give out litter pickers, for example, to people to just go out and do it. Anyway, in terms of, it's really important, I think, to meet people where they are. I mean, much of the central part of the Crane Valley is majority non-white British. Somebody once told me that the environmental community and people like ourselves, there's nobody, the only other sector of the community which is more white British are the farming community. So environmental people need to do something about this. How do we meet people where they are? It's really important. But what has been really interesting about those areas is that there are groups emerging that are Sikh-led, that are Muslim-led, that are going out and doing their thing in those rivers and open spaces. So what we're doing is helping them and supporting them to do what they want to do rather than trying to impose things. And that's been a really exciting aspect of this whole programme, really, is how different communities are emerging and to do things in their way.
A really positive note to end on. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was an excellent panel. We're now going to adjourn for 5 minutes. It's 11:40, so we're going to start at 11:45 prompt. Thanks again to our guests. Welcome back, everyone, to today's Environment Committee meeting as we continue our investigation into swimmable rivers. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guests participating in the second panel. We're joined by Mette Coban, who's MBE Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy, Abby Christostomo, Head of Green Infrastructure at the GLA, Pete Dorr, Head of Climate Change, and Sam Longman, who is Head of Sustainability and Corporate Environment at TfL. Welcome all. Mette, if I can begin with you. In his manifesto, the Mayor announced an ambitious plan for swimmable rivers within 10 years. We've spent the morning talking about it. What rivers and other waterways are in the scope of this commitment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And can I just firstly start by taking an opportunity to thank the committee. You remember that in my first committee meeting, we actually spoke about how we can work closely together to make sure that we're advancing on the Mayor's priorities. And I think this has been an excellent case base of how the committee can help support the Mayor in delivering a fairer and greener London. So, as you know, we, as part of our pledge to clean London's waterways and our rivers, we obviously, together with that, we announced a... your question was referring specifically to sites, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which rivers or waterways?
For swimmable sites?
Yes.
Yeah, so we obviously announced the swimmable guide map, which we also put as a tool for Londoners. So those are areas, those are 8 existing areas where the water quality, there's a lifeguard, and it's deemed safe to be swimmable, and that's a map available for Londoners. But what we also want to see is obviously the aspiration to create more access to swimmable sites in London, recognising that this is very much a sort of social and racial justice issue. So our job very much at the start is to really think about our role in convening everyone. We can't do this alone. So there's 3 things that we want to achieve. The first one is about cleaning our waterways. Second is about how we make sure that we restore and grow biodiversity along our waterways, and that's really important for the point around sort of access, which leads me to the third thing, which is around improving access. Really recognise the 2 things. One is that Londoners are able to enjoy the waterways, and not just by swimming or paddling, but also walking alongside our waterways. So we're embarking on this mission really to start to explore what sites can be sort of explored. And then fourth is it really requires collective action. I mean, I've sort of been keenly watching the committee meetings in the last few that you've had on this issue, and I think the one thing that's quite come very clearly is that this isn't something that one agency alone could tackle. We've got to really work together, Londoners, businesses, government, local authorities, and it's about making sure that we have that collective action. So, you know, I think as we move forward, what we're hoping to do through this term is we're hoping to, one, is to deliver a plan that could clean our waterways, but together with that, what we want to do is basically start to bring together partners to identify specific sites that we could target. But that's part of this conversation. So we're very much looking forward to your submission to the Mayor's office around this, but also all of our partners, and that's why we're going to be convening a roundtable to start that process. And the Mayor has shown this leadership when it comes to our work around London surface water strategy, for example, when, you know, in response to the flash floods in 2021, you know, the Mayor had a key role, again, recognising that he, by himself, he doesn't have the powers to solve the issues around flooding, partly because of the complex ownership of our sort of the land authorities, etc. But what we can do is start to bring together all of our key agencies to start to get the coordination. So hopefully that will be fleshed out as we move forward. Thank you.
So I don't want you to repeat yourself, but just so I can totally clarify for myself and the committee, there's 8 existing sites, those have been identified, and then you said there's aspirations for other sites. Are those other sites, do you know what they are, or is that the point of getting a roundtable to then go, these are the sites? Is there a number or a ballpark of this is what the aspiration looks like?
No, so the aspiration is to clean all of our sites across London and all of our rivers in the next 10 years. But what we're hoping to do is by convening this roundtable and starting the process of getting partners around the table, we start to look at specific sites in the next few years. What we're very clear is we can't just deliver a plan. We've got to have tangible action that goes together with the plan. So whether that's looking at nature-based solutions for how we clean our waterways, whether that's looking at technological solutions, whether it's looking at, you know, going further than that. And also, I should just say, it's really important that we also think about the interlink between sort of the green and blue spaces too. So the GLA does a lot of important work. I know Assemblymember Mahfouz was talking about the Grow Back Greener fund, and, you know, there's a lot of resource that we do put, which the Mayor has been already doing around sort of looking at how we could support that. And this isn't new. You know, I think we've already invested £11 million of 31 projects restoring or creating habitats along 3.7 kilometres of London's priority waterways. It's real progress, but we know there's so much more to do. So I think, for me, my job is 2 things. One is about making sure that this is cross-cutting across the GLA, and the team is collectively about how we're able to sort of make sure that our work on sort of the greening agenda really fits in line with the waterways. But also it's about making sure that we're convening all the partners and making sure that we're able to align our resources in a way that works better. And obviously we've got, Sam, for example, here from Transport for London. They also have a big role to play in terms of the highways, the runoff from our roads. Sam's a big fan of sustainable urban drainage systems, as I am. Did we both visit the Tolworth roundabout?
I didn't make that.
Oh, you didn't make that? The Tolworth roundabout is the biggest stud in London, 6,000 square metres of space, and we're looking at big investments like that can also help clean our waterways, but also deal with flood resilience too.
Really good to hear that it's cross-cutting. So Emma Howard-Boyd did a review into London's resilience, particularly looking at adaptation. How is this informing this work? Because there's lots of recommendations there that link into things like SUDS and about making us a city that is resilient and adapted.
Exactly that, Chair. I think you hit the nail on its head, which is you can't look at this as an isolated piece of work. Everything we do around adaptation and resilience very much interlinks with the work that we're doing to clean our waterways, because we know that runoff from our drainage systems, from building rooftops, also have a role to play in not only causing, like the floods that we see happening more and more around the world, and obviously what we saw here in 2021, but also in terms of discharging in terms of spill-off into to the waterways as well. So that is very much at the back of our mind and very much sort of, at the forefront of our mind when we are developing our adaptation and resilience efforts. And that's the point I was trying to make, which is that we've got to look at our delivery plan in a much more holistic approach, thinking about how does all these different priorities actually interlink and work together as part of one bigger picture.
So you're a deputy mayor who's relatively new, or very new, but you're supporting a mayor who isn't new. And you talked about the Surface Water Strategy Group, for instance, which then turned into a Task and Finish group, and there's been various bodies of that. I'm not yet convinced, and we were just hearing from Thames Water, that the sustainable urban drainage is happening at the scale that it needs to, or at the pace it needs to, particularly in line of Emma Howard-Boyd's review, but the general things that we know about the climate crisis. How do we know that this isn't just kind of a bold talk or a bold narrative? Like, what kind of targets can this committee be watching to make sure that this plan is on track? So I was really pleased to hear you say all rivers swimmable by 2035, but that is a huge commitment.
That is a huge commitment, but at the same time, like as I've said, we've got to be ambitious for our city.
Definitely.
Targets are very important, because if you don't have ambitious targets, then ultimately, we've got to really recognise why are we doing this. We're doing this because, as I say, this is fundamentally a social and racial justice issue for Londoners. 94% of young black Londoners don't know how to swim in the city, and a big part of that is because of the lack of education and access to swimmable sites. So we do want to be ambitious to create as many swimmable sites as possible where it's safe to do so. We're not saying everywhere will be safe. We know that not everywhere will be safe, so we're very sort of mindful of that. But I think it's really important to also emphasise that, as I say, at the very much core part of this is that this is more than just about swimming. This is about ultimately creating cleaner and healthier waterways. And, access comes in many forms, and that could be in terms of swimmable sites, but also actually it's more about how to create the nice pathways where people can, enjoy their neighbourhoods and walk alongside their waterways, really recognising the huge benefits that unlocks for people's mental well-being and all the other opportunities that come for society as part of that too. Now, in relation specifically to sustainable urban drainage systems and the targets and what scale we need to move at, that's again very much part of our role. It's very complex, as you can imagine. Local authorities have a huge role to play, partly because they control the highways, and TfL have some role to play because they control a very small percent, but still a significant proportion of that. Thames Water has a role to play in terms of sustainable urban drainage systems, because every time they dig up our roads to do works, is there an opportunity for us to actually use that as an opportunity to double up and actually install SUDs. So part of our role is basically trying to coordinate all of that. So we're making sure that as of when those works are happening, we're actually able to maximise those efforts. We're not where we need to be as a city, but also, I think globally, on our efforts around, how many SUDs we need to install. But that's something that I'm continuously pushing TfL on. It's something that I'm continuously pushing Thames Water on. And I am pleased to see progress with some of our partners on some of their work around that.
Thanks. So my final question for now, and I don't want to sound like I'm obsessed with targets, but I think they're just a useful measure for this conversation so it becomes something tangible. The mayor's term is due to run out in 2028, so we'll be 2 years away from 2030. That's another set of questions around pathways. But what does success look like? Like by the end of this term, how do we measure if this plan is working? We just heard powerfully from James Wallace this morning from River Action about the pollution that's going on just outside this door. Should things be dramatically different by 2028?
Well, I think we recognise that this task won't be easy, but just like the Mayor proved with cleaning London's air quality, he's very much put improving London's water quality at the heart of his mayoralty this term. And one of the great things about working for Mayor Sadiq Khan is that he doesn't just do the easy thing and just keeps things ticking because it's hard to start or hard to do. He actually, wants to take on some of the biggest issues of our society, and he's really showing leadership on this agenda, even though it's not solely his responsibility to do so. So I think, what good looks like for us from this process is a number of things. The first one is we want to have a plan to help create clean and healthy waterways in London. We want to have, good nature-based solutions that we can introduce into our ecosystem and to different sites across London where we could start to see, we brought back beavers, for example, to London. We want to see more nature-based solutions. We want to see good technological solutions for how we can clean our waterways. We want to start to be able to identify sites where we can bring collective action from across different partners and start to make it real tangible for people. So it's not just a strategy or just something hypothetical that we're talking in rooms like this, but actually it means real things to real Londoners, and Londoners are actually able to see the benefits of it. And I think that's the key thing is around, I think it's really about how, I always talk about this, the green transition has to sort of unlock benefits for our communities in London. And this is a prime example of how we can do that and achieve that. But also it's about, making sure that we're holding our water utility companies to account. It's about making sure that, the Mayor has a role and I have a role to call them out when, making sure that Londoners aren't footing the bill for the pricings of their own failures over the decades of inaction in terms of their own system. So I think it's a very multi-layered approach, but we're very keen, as I say, the Mayor sort of put air quality, he demonstrated it with air quality, and we want to do the same thing with water quality too.
Okay, real last question. Air quality is a really interesting comparison because the Mayor's done brilliant work on air quality. That largely was driven, from my mind, around targets that were World Health Organization, and they tightened the targets, and he quite rightly tightened his targets too, but they were easy to measure. We're talking particulates, nitrogen dioxide, etc. Are there going to be really clear measures in the same way for water quality that the Mayor had for air quality?
So I think two different things, because obviously on air quality we have more powers than we do on our waterways. What we're doing now is starting the process to basically to explore what that plan looks like. I think as part of that, we will explore all different options on what we can actually feasibly sort of commit to for London. But what we're very clear about is that this is going to be a very, very ambitious plan, and we're not just going to do something that is going to be, we want to make sure it's a bold plan for London. So, I'd imagine that, hopefully, by the time we get to that plan together with tangible action, we were able to see some real tangible benefits to Londoners by the end of this term.
By the end of this term, that sounds like watch this space for now. Assembly Member Tyrrell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid sticking with you, Messe. What actions have been undertaken on the Mayor's manifesto commitment since the announcement of Swimmable Rivers Pledge in September?
Are you referring specifically to the Swimmable Rivers, the pledge on cleaning waterways, or are you giving generally speaking? Okay, the pledge. So what we have been doing since we've announced the pledge in September is a number of things. So the first thing is about basically starting the work to develop a framework and a mechanism in how we can start to develop the plan. And the first step to that is going to be the roundtable that the Mayor will be convening. I know the Chair will also be invited along to that roundtable too. We're going to be having international partners from cities like Paris and others who've obviously shown leadership on this, Environment Agency, lots of different key agencies that will be there. We're also seeking support from, like Bloomberg Associates too, given their sort of expertise in this area, working across different cities too. So there's the plan development stage. The other bit is obviously is the work we're doing around our delivery plans. I spoke about our work around sort of the green routes before, which is another manifesto pledge, and that's basically looking at how do we sort of really think about our green infrastructure programme for London, and the link between that and our waterways, what we do want to see is that the projects that we do fund through the Green Routes programme in the future are very much sort of linked to work that can also support our pledge on our waterways. So the team is currently working up those plans as well. So we're still very much at the start of our journey. But what I am pleased about, and this is why your work has been incredibly important, is because this will help us so much in terms of helping inform our work. And again, as I say, you know, this is a fantastic example of how both the committee and the Mayor's Office can work together to really deliver a fairer and greener London.
Thank you. And what are the next steps in developing the 10-year plan?
So the next step in delivering the 10-year plan, the next step is the roundtable, which we'll be hosting hopefully very soon in March.
Thank you for that. And what actions or meetings have you undertaken in your capacity as Deputy Mayor, and what challenges are you aware of for making London's rivers more swimmable?
Since I've become Deputy Mayor, I've been very much at the forefront of frontline of meeting Londoners and campaigners and organisations across our city. So River Action, who you obviously heard from today, they organised the march, I believe in October it was. Again, I was there on the front line with the protesters, you know, really calling for our waterways to be clean, because we're recognising that this needs to be at the forefront of our national agenda. And so that's one. So meeting campaigners and talking to lots of people around how we can make sure that we bring more awareness around this issue, but also meeting Thames Water to hold them to account, to make sure that, you know, Londoners aren't footing the bill for their failures, and really pushing them to make sure that they're actually doing more stuff around sustainable urban drainage systems, the misconnections, all of those sorts of works that we know that are so important to Londoners. Meeting various different agencies, you know, on 2 weeks ago, I attended the Environment Agency's roundtable, which they also convened around sort of how we can clean our waterways, but it's looking at nationally. Obviously, we're going there from a London perspective, and I'm glad, you know, that London is, you know, showing leadership, and then actually got other agencies to start to think about what they can do as well. And that's exactly what we hope to achieve with this, which is, you know, we're under no illusion that we're not going to be able to achieve this alone. But what we can do is use our convening power to bring political urgency to this issue, but also start to get, you know, moving all the resources in a much more efficient way towards collective action.
Thank you. And one central challenge is the fragile state of Thames Water. So what conversations have you had with the government and the Mayor on what happens to these targets if the company does go bust, let alone what happens to Londoners' water bills?
What conversations I've had with government, you know, about Thames Water specifically? I haven't personally had any conversations with government about the situation of Thames Water. I have had conversations with, as I say, with Thames Water specifically around making sure that we're protecting the rights of Londoners. Yeah.
Thank you. And we know that councils are responsible for many of our smaller waterways, and we also know that councils are facing huge financial challenges, particularly those in outer London. You know, things like desilting and other river maintenance aren't a statutory service, so can become an easy target for cuts in this climate. So can I just ask, how many councils, how many of London's councils have you met with? How many of London's councils have you met with to discuss the challenges in facing river maintenance, and what conversations have you had with the Mayor and government to better support councils?
Yeah, I mean, having been a councillor for 10 years before and leading Hackney's ambition on climate action, I very much understand the importance. Ultimately, it's going to be councils who are going to be sort of leading a lot of the practical changes that we need to see, and also like is the sort of frontline service for many of our residents. So, you know, I think I've actually probably now done over 28 different boroughs in London that I've visited, and in every conversation that I have with borough leaders or senior councillors from each of those boroughs, we speak about a number of things, including how we can support them around cleaning our waterways, and actually at a first step getting their commitment to get their engagement on this issue. The work we're doing with the London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, but also I speak to them about a whole wide range of issues, be it the work we're doing around, climate adaptation, resilience, retrofit, all sorts of issues. And so this is certainly one of those conversations that I've had with, I can't name all the boroughs, but a significant portion of the boroughs.
Have you had any specific meetings with boroughs to talk about the challenges with waterways, given how high up this sits to yours and the Mayor's agenda?
I haven't had any specific meeting just for the the waterways, partly because the appropriate mechanism for that, which will come forward at some point, would be through the London Council's Transport and Environment Committee. What we want to be able to do, Assemblymember Terrell, is to be able to have a bit more sort of substantive sort of items to discuss with them. So once we sort of have the roundtable at the first step, and we start to move forward a bit more on how they can feasibly sort of engage on the process, then hopefully we'll be looking to do that with London Council's Transport and Environment Committee.
Thank you. Just on this roundtable, the final question from me, the chair will be pleased to know. So the final question from me was on this roundtable. You mentioned about the Mayor of Paris and other international partners. Who will be representing London and London councils on that roundtable?
Well, hopefully we'll be inviting the senior rep from London Council, be it whether it's Councillor Claire Holland, who's the chair, or whether it's the actual chair of the Transport and Environment Committee, which is Councillor Kieran Williams. I'll need to double check that on the list on who we're hoping to sort of invite. So we'll be looking to have very senior representation of councils at the roundtable. And your second question was about international? Did you? Oh, I mean, there'll only be probably one, and that's just to get a sort of an understanding of, what some of the work that has been done in other cities and how they can start to serve as an inspiration, really. But, we're very clear that, we need to be working with local partners. Yeah.
Thank you. It was really good to see you marching with River Action. Obviously, we had James Wallace, the Chief Executive, here this morning talking about Thames Water needing to go in special administration. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with what, sorry?
With Thames Water needing to go into special administration, so nationalisation of Thames Water, essentially.
So what I would say is that the original privatisation of water utility companies Thames Water is, in many ways, like the example of how privatisation can go wrong. What we're very clear is that, we don't want Londoners to foot the bill for their shareholders. We've been engaging with Ofwat to make sure, we're very proud to see the government who gave Ofwat the teeth back to really sort of put it onto Thames Water to really make sure that they're able to sort of deliver on the changes that need to happen. And so, we'll have to wait and see how Thames Water sort of works with Ofwat to be able to deliver the changes that they sort of deemed possible.
Do you have to wait and see, or could you call for nationalisation of Thames Water?
Well, I think we wouldn't want Londoners to foot the bill for their shareholders. So, I don't think it's fair that Londoners should have to pay to their shareholders when they've caused the mess in the first place. So I think they need to make the best effort to fix things and actually fix their systems and work with Ofwat and government to really realise that.
I agree with that, but River Action he marched with made it really clear this morning how we could nationalise Thames Water and Londoners wouldn't have to foot the bill. So would you agree with that and call for nationalisation of Thames Water?
I don't think Londoners should have to foot the bill for Thames Water's failings. I think Thames Water needs to work with Ofwat to really deliver on the changes that are deemed necessary. We're absolutely clear Londoners didn't cause this problem that we're in today, and we're not about to. We don't want Londoners to foot the bill for that.
This is almost word for word the same answer the Mayor gave me, which I think will disappoint Londoners that our collective mayors aren't calling for nationalisation of Thames Water when they failed so badly. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. The Mayor has discussed creating a plan for clean and healthy rivers. Is this clean and healthy river the same as a swimmable river? Is there any discernible difference between those two things?
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. I think that's a very important question because I think really at the heart of this pledge is about creating clean and healthy rivers. What we want to see as part of, in addition to that, is where we can create more access to swimmable sites. But at the first point, we want to create clean and healthy rivers and waterways, recognising that it's not going to be possible to swim everywhere. So that's the plan, and that's what we hope to achieve.
So clean and healthy everywhere, even if absolutely everywhere you couldn't swim. And as the Rob from the Force said earlier on, obviously the crane is in some areas, it just isn't deep enough and things like that. So, yeah, OK, so clean and healthy everywhere and swimmable where it is possible. OK. And so what are the criteria that are going to be used for deciding classify a river as being clean and healthy?
That is a very good question. I think what we're hoping to do as part of this process of developing the framework is basically fleshing out the criteria. But what I would say is that there are existing sort of criteria that are set out by the Environment Agency and other agencies that we'll be looking to lean on to make sure that, ultimately we're not going to be the one who's going to be determining whether a site is clean and healthy. It's got to be down to the regulators and the agencies to do that, and we'll be supportive of them in their efforts. But I don't know if Pete or Abby wants to come in.
I was going to say, maybe I could actually pester Abby to give us a bit more detail on that, because I know that you're the head of the sort of green infrastructure side of things. Are there any criteria at the moment that would allow us to classify, have some sort of classification about what constitutes a clean and healthy river?
Well, of course, there's the Environment Agency classification system. But I think part of the investigation that we're going into for the development of this plan is to identify what are the actual activities that people want to be doing in and on and around rivers. So whether or not kind of swimming or bathing water quality is the right metric or not is still a question, because you can, as Rob was sort of demonstrating earlier, that there are other things you can do and enjoy recreation in and around rivers that don't necessarily require that same level of water quality as swimming. And so part of the conversation is trying to understand what is that mix of activities, and then what are the different ways to then measure that kind of quality.
That's just on the human side of things. I'm wondering whether there's any criteria, about levels of as Rob pointed out this morning, my local river, Wandsworth, is named after the Wandle. It runs through Croydon and Sutton, Merton and Wandsworth. The roundtable that James was talking about is actually going to be held in Merton. But at one point, the Wandle was literally a sewer, absolutely filthy. You could smell it, and there wasn't a single fish alive in it. Now, Thames Water has created a fish kill in the Wandle because they have the Beddington sewage works, and they have, they had an overflow. But there was a point in the past where you couldn't have had a fish kill because there were literally no fish in the Wandle. Now there are, and there are herons, I'm pleased to say, fishing for the fish. So, are there some criteria like that about sort of levels of fish and other mammals and things like that?
Yeah, and
water voles, anything else?
I think that's exactly right. I think there's a lot of different indicator species for water quality health from kind of a biodiversity and ecology standpoint. And so we are looking at those sorts of metrics as well, and trying to understand how, you sort of distinguish between that human element and then the kind of wildlife nature element. And I think a big part of this is trying to understand the kind of relationship between that.
Yeah, okay. I just think it's important that we're not just talking about improving the health and the cleanliness of the river systems in London just for the human activities. Absolutely. I'm very keen that the people outside who do all the amazing things in the Royal Docks here are safe, but I also want I don't know whether you've seen our Egyptian geese. You can hardly avoid the one who is very angry with what is actually his own reflection in the windows.
I feel quite bad about him.
Apparently the staff have called him Frank, but he's now got a large family, but there's also the Canada geese and all the ducks and everything else. So to me, it has to be for both.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just checking that is the case.
Yes.
So if I can come back to the Deputy Mayor again, we had the map launched in September showing the outdoor swimming locations. How were those locations chosen? You've got sort of existing locations, but then you've also got potential locations. How were they selected?
So the existing ones are those that are currently deemed as safe to swim, where they have a lifeguard, good water quality as part of it. The ones that are potential for the future they're not decided sites. They're just, we just listed some examples of where you could look to sort of have swimmable sites, but we're not saying that those are the sites that we're going to be exploring. Those were just examples as it stated on the actual leaflet itself.
Okay, so there's sort of more examples than anything else. So what will be the process for choosing actual definite new swimming sites, or agreeing the next steps to make the sites that have been identified safe for swimming? Because obviously people have come forward with some ideas about sort of creating lagoons or barriers and all sorts of things. So it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about that from you.
Good question. I think it's about, again, recognising that we can't do this alone, and it's about collective action. What we're hoping to do as part of this process is is to start to explore where there is appetite for which specific sites where we can bring together the key agencies that are required to be able to take collective action. So hopefully throughout this process, once we kick off the roundtable and following on from that, what we would doing is working with our partners to look at what potential sites we could explore, and obviously working with our team here at the GLA, where we could start to sort of like really focusing on a couple of locations as we move forward.
Okay, so that sounds like the process for choosing the new sites is going to be ones that partners are most interested in working with us to develop?
Well, I mean, I think partly it's the partners, partly it's about Londoners, and that's partly what we hope to achieve with the map, which is about starting a conversation with Londoners about really localising their specific sites and starting to get their engagement on this issue and trying to understand where is the most desire and, you know, really engaging communities on their specific sites.
Okay, so how will we do that engagement? Are we going to do that through one of those sort of online, you know, polls where we ask people to respond to you know, an email that goes out and please get back in touch with us and tell us about this, or through social media, or how are we going to find out what sites Londoners are most interested in?
Yeah, I think that will be fleshed out as we move through the process, and the team will work on the best ways to best engage with Londoners, whether it's around polling, whether it's around, you know, some of the ways that you've suggested too. I think those are very good ideas. But ultimately, we also need realistic sites where we can actually achieve swimmable sites, and that's where we'll be very much sort of looking to our partners to really understand how we can achieve that. Okay.
And my next question does relate to something that you have mentioned, and obviously we are aware of this as the Environment Committee. But given that the Mayor does not have direct responsibility for managing most rivers and water bodies in London, or indeed you could say any, because he doesn't have complete responsibility probably for any of them, and action will need to be taken by lots of other people, including the water companies, as we were exploring this morning, regulators, and so on and so forth. How is the Mayor, what is his role going to be in this initiative of developing these new sites?
Well, I think the Mayor has already shown massive leadership. I think the conversation on sort of water and water quality and access to swimmable sites, you know, many in the country actually was led by Mayor Sadiq Khan. You know, he was the first one out the block to really put this as an issue there. So I think the first thing is about raising awareness around the issue and really, you know, being a voice for Londoners, something that they really passionately care about, but not everyone has spoken about at that level in politics. And so I think he's already shown that leadership around raising awareness. But the second thing is around the convening role that he has to play. You know, we are in a privileged position where we're able to tackle very complex issues that have very complex sort of solutions that require complex partnerships. And one of the key roles that we can play is trying to bring some of those partners to, you know, think about how we align our resources, how we can align data, share data, how do we sort of exchange on information, you know, and that's partly what we're trying to hope to achieve with this. And then obviously specifically into swimmable sites as well. Again, you know, the Mayor is very keen to make sure that he finds the right balance of what's achievable to create swimmable sites, create more access for Londoners, again, recognising this as a social and racial justice issue, but also, you know, bringing the right partners around the table to actually make that, to deliver that for Londoners.
Sure, but I'm just trying to get a sort of picture about how it might work and be taken forward. And so I'm going to use an analogy that we both know really well: community energy. Yeah. So across London, there are community energy groups that are very, very localised. I'm involved in my own local one that operates in Wandsworth, although it has schemes now in Hackney and a few other places. And there are lots of other groups across London. Many of them have all been funded by money through the London Community Energy Fund. But they are coordinated by Community Energy London. And so if the GLA is going to talk to community energy groups, probably it would start with Community Energy London, which itself holds a monthly meeting at which the community energy groups across London can attend or not, as they wish. Do you think we would be looking at something where most of the activity is being done by sort of partner groups that are voluntary organisations locally that maybe come together and have a bit of coordination, and we then work with them occasionally, or is this going to be something more that City Hall might be sort of convening more of a sort of task force, or would it be more like the Surface Water Strategy Group, where we've got representatives from the boroughs and the EA? I'm just trying to get a feel for how it might work. I'm not clear at the moment.
No, that's a great question, and you know, like ultimately, you're asking about the practicality of how this is actually.
I'm asking about practicalities because for me, to get something like this to go forward, you know, it has to be around sort of some very serious practicalities. Absolutely. You know, I came in 2016 when the mayor arrived, and we did some very, very practicality sessions with Elliot Trahan and others about how on earth cleaning up London's air was going to take place, and did a lot of questioning about how all of that was going to be implemented. To me, we're now at the sort of beginning stages of something similar, and I think you've made the comparison yourself. So, yeah. I mean, I thought we should have a RULEZ as well, a river RULEZ, because obviously you've got the fumes on the river from some of the boats. But, you know, you're actually talking about here. So we're at very early stages. I'm just trying to get a feel for how it might work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And also, should I just kind of just say, not to deflect, but like, thank you for your leadership on community energy as well. I'm a real passionate supporter of community energy, and I know the work you do across London to really bring that issue at the forefront. I think there's a number of things. So I think, you know, again, what we're hoping, I know this, you know, not to sort of not answer your question, but I think partly it's about us, you know, through this process of the convening and this initial stage is really to understand what role we can practically play moving forward. There are things that you can have, like the catchment areas, for example, that we do have, for example, with the London Surface Water Strategy that we're looking at exploring. But I don't know if officers want to come in and specifically talk about that, because I think that will help answer your question.
So, if I may, so the round table is the sort of kick-off point, and there's, you know, to answer a couple of questions previously as well.
And I believe the Wandle Valley Regional Park Trust is very happy to be hosting it.
Potentially, I believe. Yeah, you know, there's been engagement from the summer through to now with key partners, so some of which you've seen today, the Environment Agency, DEFRA, others, etc., to really get a broad perspective on what is, as you've sort of been hearing, a really complicated issue. So the roundtable brings together those partners to set that vision, to bring that clarity of what we're trying to work towards. That will then spin out into a series of sort of more focused groups, both of people at the round table and other stakeholders who, you know, being realistic about who can attend a round table. Not everybody will be able to get around the table unless it's a very, very big table. So that splits into sort of 4 broad themes or work areas, one around water quality, one around biodiversity and habitat, one around inclusion and engagement, and one around access. So they're the kind of key areas. And, you know, we'll start to then really drill down into some of the topics that have been coming up today. You know, what are those issues and practical barriers we face? What is it we can usefully do to unlock that? And, you know, some of that might be, you know, by sort of convening or enabling or using, you know, some of our sort of funding to unlock things. Other things may be lobbying, pushing for others. Thames Water, government through, you know, the current sort of assessment of the water sector, for example, what needs to happen to sort of fix that sector, which is clearly not working properly. I think we all agree on that. So that work sort of follows. I think then, you know, some of the questions around targets and what the plan is going to do naturally come out of that work. And so we'll be much
monitoring,
clearer.
Just to kind of, and monitoring as well, maybe to go back to my original question earlier on to the other panel.
Yeah, so that's right. So data monitoring, you know, all really important as part of this. So what you'll start to see is something coming much more clearly together, you know, setting out that vision, those actions we are taking already as a set of organisations, and what we are planning to do going forward over for Thames Water, this price review period, but the next one as well. I think it's important not to lose sight of that. There's 2, thankfully, to go at in this space as well. So that's the general sort of approach we're looking to take over 2025.
Yeah, I'm conscious I'm asking some of these questions and we're still at a very sort of early point, but that's good to hear, because having been involved in the Wandle Valley Regional Park Trust, which is obviously not the whole of London, and trying to bring together the National Trust, 4 boroughs, the South East Rivers Trust, you know, all the partners, the Environment Agency and so on and so forth, just to deal with, you know, a river in southwest London and what you need to do to make that clean and healthy. Probably not quite as swimmable, but, you know, it is a significant chalk stream, and that has been difficult enough in itself. Sorry, Abby, you wanted to add something to that?
No, I was just going to say, because I think in your earlier question you were asking about like identifying locations and who would be delivering and things like that. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work that we still need to do to work out the exact practicalities, but as was kind of discussed at the first panel, there are catchment partnerships, and there are a lot of different like friends groups and groups who already know some of these things in their areas. And so we're not waiting for the plan to be done to start acting. So we've been funding a lot of those types of projects in previous programs, and we are developing the Green Roots Fund that should be opening this year that will be able to fund some projects right away. And I think one of the key things we'll be looking at as part of the kind of planning process is identifying where there are gaps, especially in terms of this kind of idea of inclusion, and making sure, you know, there are places with very kind of well-organized groups that we want to continue to support, but there are also places that don't have those groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I use the analogy of community energy, because there's all these sort of grassroots organisations, very, very similar, I think, in this sort of, you know, the Friends of, you know, the Wandle Valley or whatever it is. You know, you've got many of these groups, and a lot of the open spaces also have rivers that flow through them. So you might have, I don't know, Friends of, I can't think what it's called, Ladywell Fields.
Yes.
But of course, Ladywell Fields is now, it looks amazing because they de-culverted the river and put meanders back in, and it's now an amazing location, which Peter Massini took me to lately of this parish. But anyway, thank you very much, Chair. That's very
helpful. Thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. Pete, can I just confirm, so the roundtable's in March and then there's focus groups shortly after that. Is there kind of a date set for when a plan is presented of this is what it looks like? I know some of that might have to be informed by the focus groups in terms of this is how big the challenge is.
The ambition is end of this year. So
end of this year.
I'm not going to put an exact date on it. That's I've been around long enough to know that's very risky to do. But yeah, the ambition is to have that in good shape by the end of the year.
Thanks. And Meta, you're happy with that, I'm guessing?
He said it, not me. But of course, look, we want to crack on with the plan as soon as possible so we can get to actual real action. So that's, you know, as soon as we can get to a point where we have a comprehensive plan that's, you know, got the right answers to the complex solutions that we require, then I think, you know, we want to see real tangible action in our communities.
I'm always really pleased to hear when you're talking about the social, racial and economic kind of issues, the intersectionality of it. When you're doing those focus groups to make sure that that intersectionality is there, will people be paid for their time?
I believe we discussed that, haven't we? We have actually discussed that, and we agree that that would be something that we'd be looking to explore and to do because of exactly the reason that you said, which is what we want to do is we want to have people around the table who've got a lot to say this an issue, but for a whole wide range of issues, they don't have the time to be able to come to City Hall or to have a conversation around this, and we don't want them to be excluded from such an important policy and the future of their city. So we will be compensating them and paying them for their time to attend and to be part of conversation for ultimately what's going to shape the future of their city.
Excellent, thank you.
Now we've discovered we've got a firm target of the end of the year. I think we should set aside some time in our December meeting to hear. No, I'm kidding. I mean, it's slightly harsh on you then.
I'll ask for Chair. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Quick question for Mette. What budgets have been agreed to conduct this work?
That's currently sort of being fleshed out through the delivery plan, so it's still being worked as. But what we do hope to see, Assembly Member Roberts, is obviously, as I say, is again, it's not just looking at the sort of the clean, healthy rivers specific allocated budget, but also actually is thinking about, you know, how do we drive more action in this area, specifically from, for example, the Green Roots work that we're going to be doing too. So hopefully it'll have a cross-cutting approach to that.
Ballpark figure? Even though it's still being worked out?
I can't give you a ballpark figure, yeah.
No?
No.
I tried. One other question. What staff at the GLA will be dedicated to working on this project? Will they be standalone on this project, or will they be working across other projects as well?
So two things. I think you're right. So there will be staff dedicated to specifically this project. But as I say to you, it's just like what you need in order for this to be actually achievable is you need staff from across the different area teams. So Abby's team, for example, who obviously do a lot of work around green infrastructure, and the Green Roots team will obviously be, also thinking about the pledge in relation to their work, and obviously with Pete's team and sort of adaptation and resilience as well. So I think it's the cross-cutting approach. So there'll be specific dedicated staff, but then of course this will interlink to other team members as well.
Just, if I may, I think, Chair, you mentioned a point about the SUDS work, and I think that's a good example of where, so yes, there is dedicated staff entirely focused on this work, but, the trick is to broaden that out and look at where we can maximise those opportunities across other things we do as well. So, some of that SUDS work, and, Sam is here as well from TFO, and, they're actively engaged in that too. It's about finding those synergies, and, as Mette mentioned, Abby's team, obviously, in the wider Green Roots Fund, this is an important part of that work too. Do you want to say
I was just going to add, I mean, so it's wider than just the Environment Unit as well. So we've been having discussions with our communities team, our youth team, sports team, really trying to look at the problem holistically if we're thinking about getting more people, especially more inclusive access for folks to recreate.
That's a really important point, because it goes back to the Chair's point around sort of the social justice element and communities element too. So, again, in order for us to achieve truly our aspiration of what we hope to achieve, we've got to have it, not just within the environment team, but really getting other teams to really think about how we maximise the benefits from it.
Okay, just one final thing on budgeting. We're expecting to have the finalised mayoral budget coming to us in committee, well, not committee, the Mayor's Question Time in the next couple of weeks. In previous years, we've seen about, on average, about £250 million worth of spending suddenly magicked up from nowhere. Do you think we might be seeing some rabbits pulled out of hats regarding swimmable rivers by the Mayor? Sorry if you want us. I mean, you can still the announcement now. Yeah, fish, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't comment on the budget. You'll find out when you find out.
Thank you. Just on the subject of synergy, I don't want to obsess about the roundtable, but it sounds like a really good thing that's happening. Will there be people, not just the focus groups, but the actual roundtable involved with resilience? I'm talking about not just Emma Howard-Boyd, but people involved with that review. Also groups like the Climate Change Charity Possible, just because it feels like climate could easily get missed from this, because there's lots of river stakeholders who are really important, but you don't kind of want to miss that other big piece of work.
I believe Pete's team is currently putting together the list of people that will be invited to the roundtable, but I mean, I'm more than happy for you to share across a list of people that you think should be invited for us to consider.
I'd really appreciate that if that's welcome. Thank you. Assembly Member Prince. We're on the section International Examples.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor. In September, you stated your intention to learn from international examples of swimmable rivers. Are there any cities that you are keen to emulate? Do you have any examples?
So there are some good cities who've obviously done some work on this recently. I mean, Paris obviously is the most recent one in the run-up to sort of the Olympics, and there's lots that we can learn from Paris as part of this conversation. There's cities like Copenhagen, Boston as well. The Mayor's gone to visit the Billion Oysters project in New York too, and part of that work was to look at nature-based solutions for how we can help clean our waterways. So, as part of this plan and developing this plan, what we're going to be hoping to do is trying to learn from as many international partners as possible. We're also working with the Bloomberg Associates, who are helping us develop the framework of the plan too, and obviously they've got a wealth of experience and expertise from working across different cities on what's worked, what hasn't worked. What I would say is obviously is that every city is different. Some of those international partners have very different, legislative frameworks to what we have here in the UK. So what might work there, much more straightforward, may not work here, or for example, what might be more complex there might be easier here. That's what we're hoping to learn, and really trying to, make sure that we deliver a plan in the best way possible.
Are you actually engaging with some of these, like mayors or whatever, or your equivalents in these cities?
So, as you also know, the Mayor is co-chair of the C40 network. And as part of the C40 network, we obviously work with cities from all across the world on a whole wide range of issues, be it around how we can grow our green economy, how we can clean our waterways. So as part of this conversation, I'm already engaged with some of those cities. And I actually had a call when you started your Environment Committee this morning with the C40 network about this specific issue as well. So, that is something that we're hoping to get their engagement on the roundtable too, because we recognise that they have an important role to play in really sort of being able to get us that level of expertise that we need from around the world.
Thanks, Pete. I think you wanted to come in.
No, I think Mete covered that well. I was just going to flag one of those climate groups who will be at the round table is C40, and that's the intention, isn't it,
Sure,
to bring in those international examples, both in the round table but in the following work, and Bloomberg as well.
Thank you. Assembly Member Foos.
Thanks, Chair. And Deputy Mayor Mete, I think last time we had a question together, I was asking you about the potential global impact of us being able to stay on course and deliver our climate objectives. The Mayor's obviously very well renowned for putting his neck on the line, really, to deliver clean air for London. Very much this term is about delivering clean water. How important is just making sure that you've got that kind of leadership and language at the top, supported by yourself, in terms of being able to deliver these outcomes?
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member Foos. I think, look, at a time where recent global developments have taken place, I think it's even more important that London shows leadership across the world on some of our biggest pressing issues to really inspire other cities on climate action, because we can't wait. That's the reality. This isn't something that is going to affect us in the future. It's affecting communities already here and now. And London is always ready to inspire other cities, and that's why the Mayor visited the Billion Oysters project in New York, and that's to explore nature-based solutions for how we can clean our waterways. We know that water quality is a very highly complex issue, but what we hope to achieve is the ability to be able to bring together partners to find some of those solutions to some of those highly complex issues. And London is ready to work with partners globally to show leadership at a time where we need it lots. And later on this year we'll have the COP30 summit, but also the C40 World Mayors Summit too. And that's an opportunity for us as cities to show how cities are delivering right at the front line of delivering on climate action, and how we need to deliver for our residents.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have some questions about safety and accessibility, but we're running out of time. My fault, not yours. So it'd be okay if I write those to you and reply. Excellent. I just want to prioritise time for SUDS. So on that, I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member Cooper.
So we're ditching safety in favour of SUDS on this occasion, just this once. I actually want to come to you, Sam. I know we've spoken to you about SUDS installations before when we were doing the greening grey infrastructure sessions last year. And obviously we've heard a lot today about the significance of that surface water runoff plays in making rivers absolutely filthy when it comes off roads and affecting water quality. What, if anything, is TfL, and possibly in conjunction with the boroughs, doing to reduce surface water runoff, certainly from the TLRM?
Thank you, Assembly Member, and thank you to the committee and the Chair for inviting me to speak this afternoon to you. So, in terms of just starting with road runoff itself, so the main source is obviously pollution from road vehicles. So you know this well: tyre and brake wear, exhaust emissions, oils, and just general debris. So our key actions, just checking my mic is on, is around mode shift in the first instance. So we've only got 5% of the road network, but it does carry 30% of the traffic. So the Mayor's MTS target for 80% of modes by walking, cycling and public transport by 2041 is really key to reducing numbers of road vehicles and therefore reducing pollution at source. Maintenance is key as well. We don't have a lot of our assets directly next to watercourses, but obviously there's the road runoff getting into the gullies, so making sure that those gullies are well maintained and working as they're intended, and they are designed to limit and reduce the amount of pollution that gets into the water system in terms of the pot and the trap, so the debris falls to the bottom, the oils float on the top, but the water is discharged in the middle. So maintenance is really key there. Dealing with the debris, so sweeping the roads, so it's the boroughs that have the Environmental Protection Act duty to sweep the roads, including the TLRN. So we work with them to support them in undertaking that duty, road closures, timings of things to deliver those cleaning activities. There's also incident response. So if there's spillages, normally if there's an incident such as a road traffic accident, be the emergency services that will get there in the first instance, and there, if it's a minor spillage, they'll deal with it. But anything more significant, our contractors will be there within an hour, and they've got a range of tools and approaches to clean up. But it runs throughout our whole management system, the way we do everything, dealing with potential pollution, but also surface water management, right from the beginning of developing programs, our strategy, through to delivery. We're constantly managing, understanding the risks and trying to minimise and respond.
Can I just dig in slightly into your figures, though? Because conversely, if the Mayor's target of 80% of journeys being done through a mixture of active travel and public transport is realised by 2041, and we've actually dug in as a committee before as to whether or not that might be 60% by 2030 or something like that. Given that although the Transport for London road network is only 5% of the roads but carries 30% of the traffic, doesn't that possibly mean that there might be more traffic on that 5% because of improvements to public transport, because there's more usage of public transport going on? I mean, that's been the whole thing about suggesting that people get out of their cars and get into public transport, that you actually then need to improve public transport, don't you, and improve the number of, for example, buses. Isn't that sort of a bit counterintuitively possibly going to have a negative impact on, in terms of the amount of debris from tyres, and because buses are big and electric buses are heavy?
Yeah, but in terms of their sources of pollution, they're only a minor part of the amount. You know, there's many more other vehicles on the road than the buses. I think I understand what you're driving at.
Yeah.
But generally, the ambition is to shift people into using public transport and walking and cycling in the first instance, and reduce the amount of road vehicles that we've got.
Have you done the modelling for this, I think, is the question that I'm...
For the 2080 target, yes, we're constantly modelling that, and we produce a report every year showing the progress we're making and the additional progress that needs to be made. Clearly, it's a very challenging target that is purposefully ambitious. But yeah, it's going to be challenging, but you know, is still achievable in my opinion.
Okay, so still reducing car usage helps us achieve improved dirtiness of surface water runoff. It reduces the filthiness of the...
If we reduce the number of vehicles on the road, we will reduce the source of pollution,
yeah. Okay, even if we increase the number of buses as part of that mix.
Yeah, because it won't, the number of extra buses will nowhere near offset the reduction in other traffic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, having more buses encourages more people out of
their cars.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's only the 5% of the roads, though, isn't it? You've got the other 95% of the roads, which are owned by the boroughs, controlled by the boroughs, maintained by the boroughs, or not maintained by the boroughs, although I think the government's just said there's an extra 1.5 billion to fix potholes. What are you doing to engage with the boroughs to ensure that they are adequately tackling surface water runoff on the rest of that 95% of the London's road system?
Yeah. So I think this comes back to your original question, actually, which was about, I think, driving at sustainable drainage systems, which is a key tool there. And I think we do a lot of work with London councils, with their Green Resilience Working Group, with the Surface Water Strategic Group that we're supporting, to come up with a coordinated plan on how we deal with surface water flood-off and the use of SUDs within that. TfL is also playing its part. I mean, it's been touched on already about the multiple benefits, and taking an integrated, holistic approach is key, I think, because SUDs can help through filtering water, reducing the amount of water that gets into the system, can reduce pollution getting into our watercourses, but also is key to tackling the climate emergency, improving resilience, increasing nature in the city, making it more attractive for walking and cycling, improving health and well-being. So it really is a fantastic tool, and why things like the London Climate Resilience Review is so key in order to take that forward.
That's the SUD side of it. You also referred to improved cleaning of gullies and drains, which I'm glad to hear that that's something that TfL has on their horizon. But if I walk out into my own road where I live, and I live in a part of London called Firs Down, and the reason it's called Down is because it's got a little hill in the middle, and the road I live on therefore has a point at the top, and then it drops from both sides. Almost every single drain, as I come down from the high point down to where I live at the bottom of the hill, has a blocked drain. And therefore, when there is the kind of rainfall that we're now seeing as a result of climate change, very heavy, sharp showers, quite often you can end up with what is effectively a large pond or a flood, you can call it what you like, at the bottom, because all of those drains are all blocked. Do we know for sure that local authorities, as well as working with you on SUDS, are improving their cleaning of drains and of gullies? Because we're never going to deal with surface water runoff if they're not dealing with that.
So we wouldn't have a jurisdiction. We're not the highway authority for their roads, so we wouldn't get into the detail of their maintenance regimes, although we do continue to share learning, and through this process that's been set up, there'll be a lot more learning to be shared. Our key tools are the Surface Water Strategic Group, which I won't go into because I think that's been covered well, but also through the local implementation plan process in terms of the guidance we produce, how we encourage them through healthy streets to include sustainable drainage systems and reduce flooding risk. And in terms of the work we do to improve data and modelling to look where the opportunities are, and that collaboration piece really is key to all of this. And I'd say that's how we're largely supporting boroughs to help with this agenda.
And so what would you consider to be the main barriers, coming back to the SUDS, to implementing SUDS? Would you say that all the local authorities are on side now for preferring SUDS as a good way to go, unless Pete wants to come in on SUDS?
I would say most people are on board with the benefits of SUDS and the ambition of SUDS. The barriers...
I'm talking about the practicality of installing them.
Yes.
It's a nice idea, but when it actually comes down to installing it here, are there any barriers?
So in terms of practicalities, it's the same challenges we face for most of these ambitions. It's around ensuring people have got the skills, the tools they need, the data, the evidence to make the case, the fact that we are trying to deliver multiple outcomes with a limited funding pot, and it's how you strike that right balance. And we are constantly looking at that within TfL and supporting boroughs in looking at the multiple outcomes they're trying to achieve and maximise the positive benefits. So I'd say, it's multifaceted.
Okay.
Can I just come in on that point as well? Just like, I think, having come from a local authority as well, I mean, like, the obvious big barrier is the money as well. Like, the finance is very expensive. And obviously at a time where local authorities have been stripped off cash for the last 14 years, it's obviously there's a huge pressure on council. So I think there is one piece of work we haven't really spoke about, which is obviously comes out of the London Climate Resilience Review as well, which is around starting to do the thinking around how do you look at more innovative green finance models around sort of resilience specifically, and also looking at resilience from a perspective of growth. You need to engage the business community on this agenda too, because ultimately if we ain't got high streets in the future, the businesses aren't going to exist. So we need to think about much more innovative green finance models on how we could really accelerate the investment into sustainable urban drainage systems across the city, because if we're just solely dependent on council's fund, local authority funding and other sort of existing pots, we are going to really struggle. But there are some really good examples of, for example, where TfL have worked together with Thames Water to unlock joint bids towards sustainable urban drainage systems. So I think the one that I mentioned in Tolworth, it was part of a regeneration project in the area which unlocked money from Section 106 from the development, TfL, but also from Thames Water as well. So I just think we need to, and I think that's partly the role that we can have to play, which is around how do you, channel in the resources in a way that could maximise and really join match funding across the city to accelerate our efforts.
Yeah, I think it's difficult though, isn't it? Because there is a limit to Section 106 and SIL, which are, demanded in a multiple set of different directions, including SUDS, including, all the other infrastructure that might be going towards a development, from funding for building a school through to lots of other things as well. So did you want to come in as well?
Can I just add one more thing? So the surface water flooding strategy, one important component of that is the catchment partnerships. Yeah. So getting boroughs to think beyond their boundary. So if you use the Fursdown example, imagine that cut across 2 boroughs, let's say. I know it doesn't, but you might invest in a particular place that might not be in your borough boundary, with the benefit being elsewhere. Yeah. And part of the trick there
Actually, we are on the borough boundary with
just about, isn't it?
Those pesky creatures in Lambeth. Got a couple of roads that are in both boroughs. So yeah, it's a good example.
And I think the trick is to think about how we incentivise that. So the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, how do we unlock more money that can basically do that quite hard work, which is cross-boundary, is going to be critical, and they're a really key partner in the SUD strategy too. So in terms of that unlocking, Alex talked earlier about the sort of innovation work that the infrastructure team here is doing with Thames, but there's something about unlocking that bigger pot of money from the TRFCC and really activating those catchment partnerships, which is going to be really critical. Yeah.
Well, catchment partnerships and London's flooding strategy, all very cross-boundary. But I'm going to pass back to the Chair, because I think that's going away from what I was actually asking about. Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Mayor, I'm speaking this evening on the panel on infrastructure, so I've been rereading the Stern Review from decades ago, which talks about the cost of inaction being much more than the cost of action. When it comes to local boroughs, is the Mayor and are you making the case, though, that actually investing in this is saving money ultimately in the long run? I think this is a point the Fire Brigade always make very well, because they're the ones that have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, exactly that. I think you're absolutely right. We've got to make the case for the cost of inaction is much more than the cost of action. And that's one of the roles that, when answering Assemblymember Mafusa's question, which is that, London has a leadership role to play in really highlighting how the investments we do is the morally right thing to do for future generations to help protect our planet and to make sure that they have a city that they can continue to live in, one that we all enjoyed the benefits of. So that's absolutely the case that we'll be continuing to make.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Prince, did you still want to come in here? Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you. I think just before I ask my supplementary, I think just a point of clarification, something that the Deputy Mayor said earlier about council funding, the issue of council funding beginning in 2010, whereas actually, especially in outer London, it dates much further back to the early noughties. And I think if we're going to talk about the challenge if we're going to talk about the challenges local governments face, we have to be honest that this goes back decades, not just the recent future. But that aside, Deputy Mayor, do you agree that the Mayor should double the target to 100,000 rows of drainage with SUGs in his transport strategy?
Do I agree that the Mayor should double the targets? I'm not going to comment on any specific targets at this meeting. Yeah.
Thank you. Our final section is on improving rivers for people and nature. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. I think you've answered my prime question, which was that the Green Routes Fund will be extended to include rivers. But are you looking at other funding sources from the GLA going forwards? But secondly, we've talked just a little bit just now about how hopefully this can corral funds together. And we heard from the earlier panel that's actually the plenty of funding out there, but actually because they're not merged together. So is this something you see this new group you're setting up as being part one of its main aims?
Great question, Assemblymember McCartney. I think so. A couple of things. I think we will obviously have a programme dedicated to this piece of work. Then I think if we're able to truly achieve its benefits and reap the benefits of getting as much as investment into this area as possible, we've got to look at the green work that Abby is doing, but also thinking about also other sort of stakeholders and their investment into these areas. How do we make sure that actually it's aligning as part of one bigger framework? And I think that's the important role the Mayor could play is that people want to do the right thing or they're invested in lots of different things. But if we could provide a framework where everyone is sort of putting investments into a bigger picture, I think that helps. I think we've also got to look at education as well. Thinking about, we're going to have to, support, I can't swim. There's loads of black and gold majority Londoners who can't swim in London right now, and and partly the reason for that is because we just didn't have the education when we were younger to be able to learn how to swim, and so we need to think about it from that context. We need to think about it in the context of resilience and adaptation. So hopefully it should be, as well as a specific budget for this piece of work. I think it's cross-cutting. But did you want to come in, Abby?
I was just going to add too. So, I mean, in addition to the work, the funds we're investing through Green Routes, obviously I lead a lot on nature-based solutions, but nature-based solutions are not going to be enough to tackle this. And I think that, addressing the sources of pollution and the kind of scale of investment that's needed to address these issues is way bigger than the GLA can fund on its own. So there are some, a big part of the conversations as part of this plan development is about what can be done about rallying together different pots of funding and different investments from different stakeholders, and including looking into what green finance can do for that as well.
Thank you. And we heard some good examples in the previous panel about how that could take place. Can I just check, obviously the rivers will form part of your London Nature Recovery Strategy. Is that still on track to be published for consultation in the next couple of months?
Abby's leading on that work, so she can comment on that.
Yeah, sure. So we're on track to go out for public consultation in April-May time. So we're out for pre-consultation right now, which is very kind of closed, required phase of the work with the Natural England. But we're in the middle of that. It's going okay so far, I think, and so we should be on track in spring.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. So Thames Water, who were here earlier, I think they're looking for 2.8 square metres of hectares of suds. Assembly Member Tyrrell asked you for a target. I don't want to get into a conversation about specific numbers, but I do want to get into a conversation about the principle. We're not on track right now, and there's a much bigger scale. Thames Water were really clear that this was about, and you've said several times, collective action. Are you confident, though, that the Mayor is doing everything he needs to do in terms of convening to make sure this collective action happens? Because if everyone just keeps pointing at each other and going, it's your job, it's your job, it's your job, this doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think, look, the Mayor has shown leadership, at least continuing to show leadership through, firstly, the convening of this work and putting the conversation around water quality and flood resilience really at the heart of everything we're doing. He's done that through the convening of the London Surface Water Strategic Group from when we had the flash floods in 2021. He's doing that today, obviously, with convening and starting the conversation around how we can improve and clean our waterways. And we will continue to sort of look at how we can bring together partners on how they can sort of, allocate funding on accelerating our efforts around flood resilience and sustainable urban drainage systems, and that's something that we'll continue to do.
So without having to name a target and a number, because I don't want you to just produce one out of nowhere, but will the Mayor be increasing his number? Because it's clear the number that we've got at the moment isn't enough.
I'm not going to be commenting about targets in this meeting.
Okay. Yeah. It's difficult, though, if you're saying we need to accelerate and we need to get there, but you're not going to comment on targets, because how can we know we're going to get there if we don't have a target?
Because the responsibility of the investment around sustainable urban drainage systems is not something solely down to the Mayor. He doesn't have the control over our highways in the same way that local authorities do. It's very highly complex. So, what we need to do, the role we can play is bring our partners together around the table, be ambitious, set the ambition for London, and provide them with the framework to deliver that. But it's not within our responsibility to set a target.
But I suppose that is being ambitious, isn't it? Going with every single power I have, I'm going to do as much as I can to raise the level of suds that needs to happen in London.
I think the thing is like, rather than me giving a target right now on the spot, I
don't want a target.
And I think what we need to do is, and this is part of the exercise, and I think which is why the work you're doing is incredible, is because we're now in a listening mode where we're actually sort of taking in lots of evidence and engagement from all of our different partners, including to that of the committee. Hopefully, as we develop the plan, should have when those things become, if that is something that we deem appropriate, then we will move forward with that. But at the moment, I'm not going to sort of plug a target without the right evidence or science or the budgets behind it.
Fair enough. Something on the Prince.
Thank you. Well, it's good to know that you're not making policy on the hoof, Deputy Mayor. The committee heard at last meeting about, from Thames 21, about the potential role of blue credits. I don't know if you're familiar with blue credits, Deputy Mayor. And this is funding from the new National Biodiversity Net Gain Planning Policy. Will you be looking into ways in which you can support organisations to access these funds as part of your initiative?
I think Abby's got the answer for this one for you. Is that right? Sorry.
So looking at doing a lot of work at the moment to try to identify what the opportunities are for green finance, for green infrastructure specifically. It's a much more difficult area than climate mitigation. And so there's a lot of activity going on. We're talking with partners. There were 3 projects funded through the environment agencies, and I can never remember the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, NERF funding. That was specifically looking at the opportunity for biodiversity net gain offset credits in rivers. So the PLA, ZSL, and Thames 21 looking into that. So we're in conversations with all of them about the opportunity for that. And I think there's even some of them are looking at kind of pilot habitat banking ideas. I think one of the key limitations maybe to think about when it comes to use of biodiversity net gain offsetting is that the purpose of that is really for biodiversity and managing habitats. And so, the kind of wider conversation we're having about recreation won't really be for funding for that. So offset credits are to maintain the ecology of specific habitats, so in this case, river habitats. And so whatever funding you might get out of this will be about ensuring the kind of ecological status of the river. And in some cases, there can be a conflict with that, between that and recreation. But I think it's so it's kind of one part of the puzzle in terms of funding in this area, but it doesn't really cover kind of all the different opportunities.
Okay, this might be an unfair question to you, Deputy Mayor, but if blue credits are supported, should this be included in the local nature recovery strategy, and how would this be implemented?
If what is what? Sorry, the first bit you say?
If blue credits which are supported, do you think these should be included in the local nature recovery strategy? And if so, how would that be implemented?
I think I'll need to consult with officers on that one, if I'm being totally honest. Again, I'm not one to make up things on the spot, so I wouldn't want to commit to anything without fully considering it.
I can't remember. There's hundreds of actions and priority actions in the draft LNRS, and though I did read it all, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly. But
perhaps you can just write to us.
Yeah, we can follow up. I think most of the LNRS is focused though on actions for supporting habitat, and got the kind of surrounding activities to enable that, including funding, is treated more generally.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being our guests for this second panel, and to our guests in our first panel too. It was a really excellent discussion, and thank you for your time. We've now got a few items of business to deal with, but in the meantime, please feel free to leave the room or hang out if you want to. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for 4th of May 2025. 4th of March 2025, thanks Sal, at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.